The door to Han Li's hidden room wasn't opened for several months. During this time, Silvermoon took note of what happened on the outside, preventing Han Li from missing his opportunity for entering Devilfall Valley. With each passing day, the miasma grew thinner, and the number of cultivators near the Myriad Link Mountains grew. Additionally, a majority of them were gathering in a certain part of Birchleaf City, as it was the closest city to Devilfall Valley. All of the various cultivators who acquired a Devilfall medallion were all present, and many of them had made a temporary cave residence nearby as they waited. The spell formation Han Li arranged outside of the cave residence wasn't a top-grade restriction. As such, there were many cultivators that had discovered Han Li's cave residence, and there were a few that even wished to pay him a visit. But regardless of the sound transmission talismans that had arrived at the restrictions outside his residence, none of them were given a reply. Although there were a few cultivators that weren't very pleased at the fact that the cave residence's master didn't wish to see any visitors, they were unable to do anything about it as they didn't know who the owner of the residence was. There was a risk of creating a formidable enemy. However, Han Li's behavior of refusing guests was the exception, not the norm. There were countless cultivators who arrived here, both proud and arrogant, but in the most dangerous area of the Heavenly South, they all felt the need to be careful. As a result, they either formed small groups of around 5 or joined together with their friends to enter Devilfall Valley. Although there wasn't much benefit in searching for treasures together with others, if anything dangerous occurred, they had better odds of survival than if they traveled alone. Under that mindset, even solitary and reclusive cultivators began to strive to make friends. During that time, the miasma was near the point of scattering and Silvermoon was wondering whether or not it was time to call for Han Li to leave the hidden room. But before she could come to a decision, the door opened, and Han Li calmly walked out. In the several months he was secluded, Han Li had refined over 30 puppets in succession, with the tortoise and tiger puppets equally divided in number. It was fortunate that Han Li had managed to acquire a large number of high-grade demon beast souls in his time in the scattered star seas. Even if he had an abundance of all his other materials, he wouldn't be able to craft anything without those powerful and rare souls. When the monarch of Soul Divergence saw Han Li readily taking out high-grade demon beast souls to refine personally researched puppet designs, he couldn't help but call Han Li a young monster. But he said nothing else after that outburst. When Han Li emerged, he still had enough materials to refine more puppets but reckoned that he didn't have enough time for more, and there wouldn't be a big difference with a few more puppets. Since Silvermoon had been giving Han Li reports during the time he was refining puppets, he only nodded towards her and said nothing else. He soon arrived at a dark room and watched the sovereign devil corpse and saw that everything was in order, much to his satisfaction. Then he withdrew the corpse and had Silvermoon enter his sleeve before emerging from his cave residence. Han Li immediately took off and arrived at the peak of the mountain of his cave residence. After sitting down cross-legged, he spread out his spiritual sense and slowly swept past the cave residences of the cultivators nearby. With his powerful spiritual sense, even early nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be able to detect Han Li's prying unless they were attentive. As a result, Han Li was able to sense everything within a radius of 50 kilometers, with the exception of a few areas with particularly strong auras and restrictions. But a short moment later, Han Li opened his eyes and shook his head with a frown. He didn't find who he was looking for. With some thought, Han Li then glowed with light and flew towards the nearby market city. Given current circumstances, it should have gathered quite a profit by now. The market city nearest to Han Li's cave residence was opened by a large cultivator clan from the state of Dongyu. The clan had done this for ages, and indifferently opened their market city despite the news of the treasure hunt in Devilfall Valley. As a result, business thrived due to the appearance of a large number of high-grade cultivators. There were even a few common cultivators that took advantage of the thin miasma and harvested the resources that were exposed, managing to reap a profit without any intention of entering Devilfall Valley. Inside a simple medicine shop in the market city, a white-clothed cultivator pair were pointing at a medicinal herb and talking about it with a shopkeeper. A short moment later, the three came to an agreement, and the pair took out a pile of spirit stones, much to the delight of the shopkeeper. The two cultivators were the only ones walking on the street at that moment. The scholarly youth smiled to his female companion and said, "Junior Martial Sister Yuan, our luck has turned out to be quite good. After spending only a short while in this market city, we managed to buy a gold spirit branch. You've been looking for this herb for a good while. You can start refining the breath refinement pill. This was because of the spirit stones that senior martial brother Bai lent me. Otherwise, I would have missed the chance. The white-clothed woman had a common appearance, but her eyes were bright and spirited, adding a bit of seductiveness to her charm. Junior martial sister's affairs are mine as well, so this small number of spirit stones is nothing. Although the white-clothed youth did feel a bit of heartache over the large purchase, he wore an expression of complete adoration towards the woman at his side. The white-clothed woman pursed her lips in a smile, but just as she thought to say something, a person suddenly appeared in their way. He immediately raised his hand and shot a yellow streak of light towards them. In his alarm, the white-clothed youth's hand flashed with white light, and he unconsciously caught the yellow streak of light in his hand before discovering that it was a shining yellow command medallion. The youth recognized the medallion and raised his head to look at Han Li in alarm. The Heaven Peak writ, your senior Han. This youth was the Heaven Peak disciple Bai Shujun, who had attempted to grab Han Li's attention in the past through Mu Paling. After Han Li arrived at the market city, he had immediately found him with his spiritual sense and rejoiced. Through him, Han Li should be able to find his master, the Heaven Peak Sect's Lu Weiying. However, Han Li didn't have a very good impression of this person and treated him without regard. Without a trace of politeness, he spoke in an oppressive tone, I need to see your master. Lead me to him, fellow Taoist Bai. Senior Han, you wish to see my master? After closely inspecting the talisman in his hand, he respectfully replied, yes, I will bring you to him. Han Li was no longer a newly ascended early nascent soul cultivator. He was now in existence on par with the three great heavenly south cultivators. This had caused Bai Shujun to greatly regret his impudent actions from the past. Now that he had verified the command medallion, he promptly agreed in hopes of improving Senior Han's impression of him. As for the woman by his side, she examined Han Li with slight astonishment. With a flicker of her eyes, she remained silent. Under the guidance of Bai Shujun, the three left the market city and flew off toward the east. After flying for over a quarter hour, Bai Shujun brought Han Li back to the Myriad Link Mountains. After heading in for a couple tens of kilometers, they arrived at a small mountain. Han Li's gaze swept past the mountain, observing that although the mountain was small, it was well hidden by the tall surrounding mountains. After activating the Brightsight Spirit Eyes, Han Li revealed a pensive expression after penetrating the mountain rock. At that moment, Bai Shujun took out a sound transmission talisman from his robes and tossed it into the air. It flew into the mountain stone in a streak of fiery light and created a series of ripples throughout the wall before disappearing from sight. Standing at Han Li's side, the youth eagerly offered Han Li an explanation. This is my master's temporary residence. It is often concealed with the minor Zumi restriction. He gave his disciples orders that unless it was important, we were not to bother him. Even junior martial sister Lu cannot rashly pay him a visit during this time. However, since Senior Han has sought him out, it must be important. My master definitely won't scold me. When the woman heard the youth mention her, she snorted and wore an unhappy expression, but she remained silent in Han Li's presence. She had already guessed who Han Li was. As Lu Weiying's descendant, she didn't dare to be disrespectful in front of Han Li. Han Li glanced at the woman at his side and casually asked, oh, your surname is also Lu. Could you be fellow Taoist Lu's descendant? The woman sweetly smiled and said, Elder Lu is my great-uncle. However, I have heard of Senior's famous reputation for quite some time. Han Li weakly smiled back but said nothing further. Azure light flashed from the wall in front of them, suddenly opening a 6-meter-wide gate in the wall. A leisurely voice spoke from within. He, fellow Taoist Han, you've finally come. If you hadn't come, I would have had to personally go and find you. Please come in, I'm waiting for you in the main hall. Han Li smiled and wordlessly stepped inside. Bai Shujun and the woman surnamed Lu hesitated for a moment, but when they thought to enter, their master called out to them, you two don't need to enter. I have a few things to discuss with fellow Taoist Han. You may head off and deal with your own matters. Although the two were somewhat shocked to hear his orders, they didn't dare to disobey and respectfully acknowledge him before flying off. Once Han Li entered the gates disappeared in a flash of azure light, restoring its original appearance as a stone wall. Just like how Han Li had created his own interim cave residence, the Heaven Peak Sect's Elder Lu's cave residence was the same. After Han Li walked through a 60-meter-long passageway, he arrived at the cave residence's main hall, a stone room that was over 20 meters wide. A gray-robed old man with a friendly face and a middle-aged man with a tall hat were both waiting for him. The gray-robed old man smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Han, you've finally arrived. Brother Han has kept us waiting for quite a while. We've sent people to look for you for a month already. It's a pity that you were so well hidden. Since we couldn't find even a trace of you, we thought Brother Han had changed his mind. Marquis Nanlong bitterly smiled, but a trace of happiness could be seen from his face. You also weren't easy to find, given how secretive your residence was. Han Li sighed and helplessly explained, not long before, I was sealed in seclusion for a time, so it was natural that you couldn't find me. Just as Han Li took a seat, Marquis Nanlong wore a strange expression and said, Brother Han is as famous as the sun is bright. Not only did you display extraordinary skill in the battle at the border, but I heard you slew a mid-nascent soul elder from a Jin Empire Devil sect. You must have spent quite a bit of effort to conceal your abilities. Unwilling to reveal the entire truth, Han Li shook his head and vaguely said, It isn't as if Brother Nanlong hadn't seen my abilities before. If I truly possessed such incredible abilities, I wouldn't have had to flusteredly flee from the Mulan Plains. My current fame is only a matter of luck. Speaking of matters of luck, it's because of luck that I managed to appear before you today. When Elder Lu and Marquis Nanlong heard Han Li, they couldn't help but look at each other with doubt. With their spiritual sense, they were able to clearly sense that Han Li's cultivation was only at early nascent soul stage. Likewise, they knew that Han Li was unordinary, but the two still found it hard to believe that he was able to slay a devil cultivator at the peak of mid-nascent soul stage. However, all the rumors about Han Li were widely spread and spoke of his amazing feats, much to the bewilderment of the two mid-nascent soul cultivators. Marquis Nanlong dryly laughed and said with an ironic tone, He, fellow Taoist Han is far too modest. To tell the truth, the greater your abilities, the better it will be when we enter Devil Fall Valley. We look forward to witnessing the power of a cultivator on par with the three great Heavenly South cultivators. When Han Li heard this, he silently smiled and said nothing further, wishing to drop the matter. Elder Lu then spoke with a solemn voice. Brother Han, since you've sought us out, it seems you've put some thought into our proposition. Are you willing to enter the valley with us and kill the ancient flame toad together? Once the old man finished speaking, Marquis Nanlong also stared at Han Li with a solemn expression. I don't wish to let go of such a golden opportunity, but there is something I have to ask before I come to decision, Han Li answered with complete calm. How will we divide the treasures we find amongst ancient cultivator remains? If the answer is acceptable, I will take the risk of accepting this journey. Although he was certain to enter Devil Fall Valley one way or another, he wasn't about to reveal his intentions and allow them to negotiate the conditions. It was unknown how much the two had discussed the matter previously, as the old man promptly responded, If we are able to smoothly acquire the treasures, how about we evenly divide them? Han Li didn't immediately reply or reveal dissatisfaction. Instead, he muttered to himself for a moment and replied, This is fair. After all, without you two to guide the way, I also wouldn't be able to deeply enter into the valley or be able to find the ancient flame toad. However, I still have one more condition that I hope you two will agree to. Fellow Taoist Han, please state your condition. Elder Lu spoke without any hesitation. While Marquis Nanlong's face stirred, he stared at Han Li in silence. I need the inner core of the ancient flame toad. It is useful to me. Han Li spoke of the matter with a casual tone, as if it were only something of little value. Elder Lu promptly agreed upon hearing him. This will be no problem. We are relying on you to slay the beast. It is only proper for you to have its inner core. Marquis Nanlong's expression relaxed after hearing Han Li's request. That's right. Even if fellow Taoist hadn't mentioned it, we would have given the core to you anyway. Han Li smiled after hearing them and said, Since you have both agreed, I won't push matters further and be too greedy. I agree to head into the valley alongside you two fellow Taoists. With fellow Taoist Han by our side, the treasure will be acquired very smoothly. We will be relying on you, Brother Han. Seeing that Han Li had agreed, Marquis Nanlong and Elder Lu couldn't contain their excitement and spoke in succession. Not at all carried away by their praise, Han Li smiled and said, You both value me too greatly. I am well aware that you two will be the leaders in the valley and I will only be acting as support, considering my cultivation. Also, it will only be with our combined efforts that we'll be able to escape unscathed. This is natural. Since we sought out fellow Taoist Han to cooperate with us, we trust you greatly. If those treacherous villains from the Ghost Spirit Sect had acquired the Yin-Yang Ring, I would have had to directly kill them. When Marquis Nanlong mentioned the Ghost Spirit Sect, he gritted his teeth. It appeared that the damage he had suffered from his previous battle was truly frightening. When Han Li heard this, he couldn't help but take another glance at Marquis Nanlong. While he still appeared well, it was unknown how much of his vitality he had managed to recover. Speaking of the Ghost Spirit Sect, do you two fellow Taoists know about the method they are using to enter the valley? What is your take on it? Han Li asked. Marquis Nanlong coldly chuckled, and a strange expression appeared on his face. What is there to say about it? We merely interfered with their plans to monopolize the treasures. With other cultivators entering the valley, not only will it conceal our tracks, but it will also prevent us from being surrounded by the Ghost Spirit Sect. With slight surprise, Han Li said, "From what you've said, could it be that the both of you had deliberately leaked the information that the Ghost Spirit Sect had a method to enter Devil Fall Valley?" Marquis Nanlong's face then changed to a sullen expression. "We are indeed behind the matter. Before we journeyed to the Mulan Plains, I had known the Ghost Spirit Sect was researching a method to enter Devil Fall Valley. Since they have suddenly grown hostile with me, I will not be polite." And Li didn't give his own thoughts on the situation and simply nodded, his mind wandering. As for Elder Lu, he frowned and slowly said, "However, I didn't expect that the Ghost Spirit Sect would bluntly issue the Devil Fall medallions and sell them to various sects in limited quantities. As a result, they guaranteed themselves to be the largest power entering the valley. I fear the Ghost Spirit Sect plans on having these cultivators scout the way on their behalf. As a result, the valley's treasures will no longer be monopolized by them, but the danger will be vastly reduced as well." Stroking his chin, Han Li smiled and said, "There is no such thing as a perfect situation in this world. Your actions have caused us more benefits than harm. It is likely the Ghost Spirit Sect's elders are gritting their teeth with resentment." With roused spirits, Marquis Nanlong said, "Fellow Taoist Han's words are correct. This has caused the Ghost Spirit Sect to suffer for the time being. As for the rest of my hatred, I will have to settle accounts after I emerge from the valley." Afterwards, the three began to discuss the movements of the Ghost Spirit Sect and chatted about the arrangements and details of entering Devil Fall Valley. 7 days later, the miasma surrounding the myriad Link Mountains had nearly disappeared. The many cultivators that had remained hidden nearby suddenly appeared in great numbers and made their way towards Devil Fall Valley one after another. There were also cultivators who possessed lower cultivation and those that were unwilling to enter, who were merely taking advantage of the weakened miasma to search for spirit beasts and medicines in the mountains. Devil Fall Valley was located in the northwest area of the myriad Link Mountains, spanning an area of tens of thousands of kilometers. However, the battle amongst ancient devil cultivators had caused the surrounding valley and sky to be layered with fearsome ancient restrictions. They were all incredibly difficult to deal with and overlapped in such a way that it formed an impenetrable barrier. The sole area that lacked these restrictions was the entrance to Devil Fall Valley. It was 300 meters wide and narrowed, as it went tens of kilometers within. This path was originally easy to pass through, but the effects of the ancient battles had ravaged the area, leaving it densely filled with spatial tiers. Glaring white lights shined from some of the tiers, while others were dim and completely invisible. The sizes of these tiers varied anywhere from a few inches to several tens of meters wide, allowing them to engulf several tens of men without problem. As for the small tiers, they were similarly incredibly deadly blades hanging in the air. Most terrible of all is that over time, these spatial tiers would wander, as well as open and disappear intermittently. There was no pattern to their appearance. Because of these fearsome spatial tiers, almost no cultivators had ever made it out of the valley alive, even bringing countless nascent soul eccentrics to their end. The reason for Devil Fall Valley's reputation as the most dangerous area in the heavenly south was mostly attributed to its spatial tiers. But this time would be different. According to the Ghost Spirit Sect, one would be able to safely pass into the valley, creating a disturbance throughout the heavenly south. Suddenly, cultivators began to eye the treasures with greed, and the several hundred Devil Fall medallions were cleanly divided up eagerly. There were also a few cultivators that were unable to acquire a Devil Fall medallion, and could only gather around this area in hopes that they could somehow manage to sneak into the valley. Vines covered the small valley surroundings as a ball of white light shot towards it. Within the white light, there was a beautiful green-robed woman sitting upright on top of a snow-white bird. In the blink of an eye, the bird arrived above the small valley and folded its wings, diving towards the dense vines below. The woman raised her hand and launched a spell seal down below, causing the scene to tremble with green light. The vines suddenly disappeared to reveal a green light barrier. The woman dismounted from the bird and vanished through the barrier with a flash of white light. The barrier disappeared to reveal 6 cultivators all clothed in green as well. They were sitting around a 5-pointed spell formation about 20 meters wide at the entrance of the small valley. With one of the cultivators sitting cross-legged at each of the spell formation's corners, it began to flicker with spirit light. The remaining cultivator was a long-bearded old man sitting at the center of the spell formation with his eyes closed. Suddenly, the old man opened his eyes and looked up at the sky. There was a white light slowly descending onto them. A moment later, a green-robed woman appeared in front of the old man and saluted him as soon as she landed. The green-robed woman lowered her head in respect and said, "This disciple greets her Marshal Senior. The miasma on the mountain range has completely disappeared. There are many cultivators that have already gathered in front of Devil Fall Valley." The long-bearded old man twirled his beard and slowly asked, "Has the Ghost Spirit Sect made an appearance yet?" After a moment of thought, the woman carefully replied, "Apart from a few, a majority of the Ghost Spirit Sect have yet to take action." The long-bearded old man snorted and said, "Since the Ghost Spirit Sect have yet to take action, we must not move hastily either. So long as we pay attention to their elders, we won't encounter any mishap. Marshal Nice Han, continue monitoring their movements, and as soon as there is a change, immediately report back." "Yes, this disciple will set off." The green-robed woman accepted his orders without any opposition. After saluting the old man once more, she flew off on the spirit bird. The old man watched as the green-robed woman left until she disappeared, and his eyes brightly glinted as he momentarily sank into thought. The 5 cultivators sitting around the spell formation were completely unperturbed by the appearance of the woman surnamed Han. They all remained completely still as if they were made of wood. The long-bearded old man didn't find this out of the ordinary at all, and closed his eyes once more. On the top of a lofty mountain, there was a middle-aged, gray-robed Taoist priest standing on top of a boulder. He was staring in the direction of Devil Fall Valley with a squint as raging winds blew against him. The Taoist priest turned his head to look at 2 sinister puppets at his side with a trace of satisfaction. He muttered, "With these 2 nascent soul-level ancient puppets, I'll reap a great harvest from this journey to Devil Fall Valley." With that said, the Taoist priest raised his arm and struck the puppets with a spell seal. In an instant, the puppets quickly shrunk and shot into his sleeve. Soon, the Taoist priest tore through the skies in the direction of Devil Fall Valley as a streak of red light. In another corner of the sky, there were 3 streaks of light arranged in a row, flying towards Devil Fall Valley. If Han Li were to see the trio, he would be greatly surprised as he would recognize 2 of them. One was a sallow-faced, yellow-robed old man, ancestor Linghu of Yellow Maple Valley. By his side was a white-robed woman with a pale complexion and a chilly expression, the Grand Elder of the Masked Moon Sect and Nangong Wan's senior martial sister. The one that Han Li wouldn't recognize was the old man, who had a steep brow and a lion's nose. The 3 were completely silent as they hurried on their way, and soon disappeared into specks of light that faded from the sky without a trace. At the same time, many cultivators began to appear near the myriad Link Mountains, seeming completely confident in their abilities. As of current, Han Li had already arrived nearby Devil Fall Valley. He was sitting on a mound several kilometers away from its entrance, pensively looking in the direction of Devil Fall Valley. At that moment, Han Li used his spiritual sense to probe a radius of 10-some kilometers nearby. He found that over 1,000 cultivators had already gathered here, with many nascent soul eccentrics hidden amongst them. While these cultivators weren't characters on par with the 3 great Heavenly South cultivators, they were all exceptional individuals who wielded strange and troublesome secret abilities. Han Li wasn't so conceited as to believe that he had nothing to fear from cultivators that weren't on the level of the 3 great Heavenly South cultivators or the Mulan divine sages. It would only take a single mistake for him to lose his life in the valley. As Han Li pondered, he would occasionally take the measure of the entrance to Devil Fall Valley. If it weren't for the cultivators that were gathered there, Han Li wouldn't have believed that such a common mountain opening would be the entrance to Devil Fall Valley. However, there were roiling gray clouds above the entrance that surged with spiritual chi. It was an odd omen that left a cold impression on those who saw it. From the outside, the entrance appeared only 30 meters wide, but he was only able to see 300 meters into the valley when he attempted to probe it with his spiritual sense. A restriction of the valley had blocked him from seeing any further, and he was unable to personally witness the so-called spatial tiers. Although Han Li could forcefully puncture the restrictions with his spiritual sense, he hesitated to do so at an area as dangerous as Devil Fall Valley and cautiously withdrew his spiritual sense. Soon after, Han Li sat cross-legged on the mound, and he closed his eyes. Time slowly passed by until half a day later, when Han Li sensed a familiar aura amongst the increasing number of cultivators that gathered there. After some thought, Han Li was able to identify them, and he frowned. During that moment, there was a nearby voice that shouted with alarm, "The Mulan have arrived. The Mulan spell warriors also wish to search for treasures in Devil Fall Valley." Following that announcement, an uproar filled the entrance and Han Li felt his heart tremble. When he opened his eyes, he saw a strange flying carriage moving in their direction. The carriage's body was round and over 60 meters in length. It sparkled with silver light and was engraved with talisman characters all over its body. There were over 10 cultivators dressed in Mulan robes standing in the carriage, revealing them to be Mulan spell warriors without a doubt. When Han Li saw this, he wore an astonished expression. Although he had heard rumors that the Mulan were going to arrive, he hadn't believed it to be true. After all, the Heavenly South may have made peace with the Mulan, but the battle at the border had left both sides with vast injuries. The Mulan had formed a deep hatred between many sects, and without the passage of several hundred years, this hatred wouldn't easily disperse. Under such circumstances, it was rather inconceivable that the Mulan would dare to enter so deep into the heart of the Heavenly South to look for treasures in Devil Fall Valley. Could it be that they had no fear that vengeful cultivators would plot against them from behind? Just as Han Li thought this, the huge carriage arrived above the entrance to Devil Fall Valley, clearly revealing the faces of the spell warriors it contained. Han Li glanced at the two in the lead and came to a realization. With those two in charge, they had no fear of retaliation from common cultivators. However, it was something of a mystery as to Han Li why the three great Heavenly South cultivators would allow them entry. The two spell warriors leading them were the scholarly divine sage surnamed Zhang, and the woman surnamed Le, who guarded the ancient lantern. The flying carriage dropped on a small mountain not far from Han Li. After the spell warriors walked out of the carriage, spell warrior Le struck the chariot with a spell seal, and it shrunk in size. When the others at the entrance of Devil Fall Valley saw this, they were astonished and felt the same surprise as Han Li. Just as the cultivators watched the Mulan's arrival with cold and hostile gazes, light flashed from the horizon to reveal over 100 streaks of light flying towards Devil Fall Valley. "It's the Ghost Spirit Sect," shouts echoed from those who recognized them, and the attention directed at the Mulan shifted toward the sky. As for Han Li, he also glanced upward with a cold snort. The speed of these traveling lights couldn't be considered fast. They calmly arrived above the valley's entrance and descended 300 meters away from it. The lights disappeared to reveal over 100 black-clothed cultivators, all of them Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators. The three leading them caught Han Li's attention. He recognized the one standing to the left, the Ghost Spirit Deputy Sect Master, Wang Tiangu. His heart stirred, and he swept his gaze past the crowd only to spot Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan. Wang Chan appeared to be in good health and still had all his limbs, but Yan Ruyan appeared somewhat sallow. Could it be the Yin Devil execution didn't injure him, or did he just restore his limb and hide it? As these thoughts quickly appeared in Han Li's mind, he wasn't able to come up with an answer. But given Han Li's current abilities and reputation, Wang Chan could no longer be considered a threat. As a result, his attention turned to the other two nascent soul cultivators in the lead. The cultivator at the center was a middle-aged man wearing wide robes whose harsh expression possessed an uncommon air of authority. From a glance, one could tell he was in charge. To his right was an old man with a pale complexion that had peppered hair, sharp eyes, and a sinister aura. While they were both nascent soul cultivators, they appeared unfamiliar to Han Li, as if they hadn't participated at the battle at the border. However, the old man's mid-nascent soul cultivation caught Han Li's attention. The Ghost Spirit Sect's Taoist Shattered Soul hadn't come, to Han Li's surprise. This unfamiliar old man came in his place. However, mobilizing three nascent soul cultivators was quite a show of force, even from a sect as large as the Ghost Spirit Sect. But considering that they were trying to oversee an area as dangerous as Devil Fall Valley, it was still somewhat lacking. Could it be that the Ghost Spirit Sect had made other preparations? Just as Han Li pondered this, the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators hurriedly scattered around the valley entrance, appearing to set up a huge spell formation. The nearby cultivators didn't disturb them and simply watched from the side. As for the Mulan spell warriors, they were also gathered together. Their leaders, the scholarly man surnamed Zhang and spell warrior Le, were currently discussing something with soft voices. Han Li stared at the spell formation with clear eyes and a calm expression. But a short moment later, Han Li's expression stirred and he looked to the sky with bewilderment. At that moment, light flashed from the distance, and a blinding streak of white light suddenly shot across the sky like a bolt of lightning, scattering any clouds that came across its path in a display of astonishing momentum. By then, the other cultivators also saw this shocking occurrence. In an instant, the white light suddenly arrived above the valley entrance, fading away to reveal an azure-robed old man with an expressionless face. Wei Wuya. He's also come. Could it be that the Nine Nations Union are also determined to acquire the treasures in Devilfall Valley? An uproar surged amongst the nearby cultivators when they clearly saw the old man's face. But what was cause for even greater surprise was how Wei Wuya slowly descended in front of the Ghost Spirit Sect. When the middle-aged Ghost Spirit Sect elder with the unfriendly face saw this, he smiled and saluted Wei Wuya. "Brother Wei, you finally arrived. I believed you had been delayed by other affairs. If that were the case, we would have had no choice but to postpone entering the valley. Since I've made an agreement with fellow Taoist Wang, I won't rashly change my mind. But it will be best if you spoke honestly. If the valley doesn't have the items that you've described, don't blame me if I become hostile." Wei Wuya ignored the middle-aged man's smile. It came as no surprise. The Nine Nations Union didn't have a good relationship with the Devil Dao. "Be at ease, fellow Taoist. I wouldn't dare to trick you." The middle-aged man ignored Wei Wuya's bold words and continued to welcome him. The scene caused the nearby cultivators to watch with astonishment. Wei Wuya was the Grand Elder of the Nine Nations Union and apparently was now working with the Devil Dao. If one didn't see it with their own eyes, how could they possibly believe it? Han Li frowned at the sight of this. Now if he were to clash with the Ghost Spirit Sect inside Devilfall Valley, his only choice would be to flee given that Wei Wuya was sided with them. This was something beyond his expectations. As Han Li pondered this, he couldn't help but glance at the scholarly man surnamed Zhang. If no other late-nascent soul cultivators were going to enter Devilfall Valley, then these two would have the strongest cultivations. The Mulan Divine Sage was calmly staring at Wei Wuya with his arms held behind his back, and it was unknown what he was thinking. As for Spell Warrior La, she seemed surprised to see Wei Wuya appear here. Although Wei Wuya's presence had come as a shock to many, the cultivators present were still watching the Ghost Spirit Sect disciples as they finished laying down their spell formation. After half a day's time, the spell formation had now reached over 300 meters in width as it was being constructed. As Han Li saw it being set up, he slowly became completely bewildered. The spell formation appeared to be a portion of an ancient transportation formation that he had studied once before, but there were a few minute differences where portions were either simplified or more complex. It had clearly been altered greatly. Han Li squinted his eyes and stared at the spell formation in silence. Although his attainments in spell formations were great, he wasn't unable to unravel the secrets of the spell formation in a short amount of time. He could only frown in thought. 2 hours later, the spell formation was finally complete, and the Ghost Spirit Sect disciples began to place various mid-grade spirit stones around it. Originally standing to the side, Wang Tiangu suddenly stood at the center of the spell formation in a blur. He then slapped his storage pouch and took out a jade box. The other two Ghost Spirit Sect elders didn't appear surprised in the slightest by Wang Tiangu's action. Wang Tiangu opened the jade box and revealed a golden-yellow spirit stone. The spirit stone shined magnificently and immediately released a wave of astonishing spiritual qi upon leaving the jade box. "A high-grade spirit stone," someone suddenly shouted with alarm, much to the surprise of the cultivators who heard this. Han Li's expression changed upon hearing this as well. The spiritual power of a high-grade spirit stone was only equivalent to about 100 mid-grade spirit stones. But in truth, 100 mid-grade spirit stones were far less valuable than a high-grade spirit stone. A high-grade spirit stone cost at least 1,000 mid-grade spirit stones and were hardly ever purchased. The reason for this was because high-grade spirit stone mines were easily detected. As a result, there were few that still existed. As of current, these spirit stones were only rarely found deep at the end of a mid-grade spirit stone mine. Unfortunately, many ancient and formidable spell formations and restrictions all required the use of high-grade spirit stones. Even common spell formations were enhanced when activated with the power of these spirit stones. Additionally, a high-grade spirit stone is able to supply a nascent soul cultivator with a great amount of spiritual power. As a result, The price of high-grade spirit stones is incredibly high, and they only become rarer with the passage of time, nearly vanishing from the heavenly south. As for the peak-grade spirit stones from legend, they had already disappeared before the times of antiquity had come to an end. They now only remained in legends. Han Li couldn't help but grow fervent as he saw Wang Tiangu solemnly place the gold attribute, high-grade spirit stone, at the center of the spell formation. Han Li had killed many cultivators, but never once had he acquired a high-grade spirit stone. Even if he attempted to find one at a market city or such, it would be a hopeless affair. After all, high-grade spirit stones were all stored away by few large sects in the cultivation world in case there was ever a need for them. Now that the Ghost Spirit Sect had taken out a high-grade spirit stone, it appeared they viewed this matter with the utmost importance. Of course, it now made sense why they were selling Devil Fall medallions at such an incredible price. After placing the high-grade spirit stone in the proper location, Wang Tiangu returned to the side of the middle-aged elder and whispered a few words. The middle-aged cultivator nodded, and then gave the command for the Ghost Spirit Sect disciples to withdraw from the spell formation. The disciples each took out a faint yellow formation flag after withdrawing from the formation. With great familiarity, they immediately raised the flags into the air and quickly assumed a strange formation. At that moment, the spell formation began to glow as if it were accumulating power. Could it be that this person was the true sect lord? Why else would Wang Tiangu treat him with such respect despite their similarities in cultivation? Han Li stared at the middle-aged cultivator, and his mind began to ponder as he examined the fierce-looking man. At that moment, black chi suddenly wrapped around the middle-aged cultivator's body and he slowly rose into the air. He swept his eyes across the ground and said, "I am the Ghost Spirit Sect's Wang Tiansheng, the Ghost Spirit Sect's master. I won't speak any nonsense. The path to enter Devil Fall Valley has already been established. With the spatial tiers already shrunken and stabilized, we can now enter the valley. Our sect's many spell formation masters have thought long and hard as to how to create a particular transportation formation that allows us to easily enter the valley. For this transportation is somewhat unusual. It requires the use of a metal attribute high-grade spirit stone in order to activate. It is only with great generosity and a heavy heart that we were able to bring out such a spirit stone, but as a result, there is a limit to the number of people that we can bring. So long as you possess a Devil Fall medallion, you will be allowed to use the spell formation to enter the valley, regardless of your affiliation. I hope fellow Taoists won't blame me. There are other matters that I must first make clear. This is a one-way transportation formation. Because the teleportation location isn't set, there's a very small possibility of teleporting people into a spatial tier. If this occurs, then we can only say that your luck wasn't enough and we cannot take the blame. After all, the transportation method isn't fully researched and was something produced in a rush, so there is a certain amount of danger. Those that are unwilling to brave the danger shouldn't use my sect's transportation formation." With that said, the middle-aged cultivator boldly folded his arms and immediately added, "If you do not have a Devil Fall medallion, don't think you can sneak in. When everyone with a medallion is teleported, the spell formation will be destroyed." Although those words weren't spoken loudly, they were clearly heard by everyone in the valley's entrance. For a time, cultivators began to whisper or use voice transmissions to discuss the matter. A young voice suddenly spoke from within the forest with a puzzled tone. "Since we are using the transportation formation to enter, how will we get out? Will your esteemed sect be placing down another spell formation inside?" As soon as this was asked, many nodded in agreement. As for Han Li, he coldly smiled upon hearing this question. Wang Tiansheng emotionlessly replied, "There is no need for this fellow Taoist to worry. From what I know, Devil Fall Valley has many ancient restrictions that may prevent you from entering the valley, but there should be little resistance in preventing you from leaving. There may even be ancient transportation formations that are intact inside the valley. If so, it should be a simple matter to use them to leave." After hearing the Ghost Spirit Sect Master mention the ancient teleportation formations, a few cultivators rejoiced at his words, while others remained skeptical. After all, few truly knew of the internal situation of Devil Fall Valley. To put everyone's hearts at ease, I will have Quanzi and Elder Zhang go across first. We will have everyone else cross afterwards. Wang Tiansheng finished and waved his arm towards Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan. The silver-masked Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan walked towards the center of the spell formation and stood next to the mid-nascent soul old man. Soon after Wang Tiansheng gave the command, the cultivators simultaneously pointed the flags down, shooting an arm-thick rainbow beam of light towards various points of the spell formation. Suddenly, the entire spell formation began to hum, and the spirit stones around it began to brightly shine. This scene stirred the nearby cultivators, but Wang Tiansheng paid them little notice. Wang Tiangu then brought 8 core formation cultivators with him towards the spell formation. In that moment, the other cultivators clearly saw that, while the spell formation may appear enormous, it seemed to only be able to teleport 3 people at a time. As a result, the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators had to be teleported in batches. Seeing that the Ghost Spirit Sect had rushed to take the first step, the other cultivators grew tempted to follow them. However, cultivators were often cunning and cautious. For a time, no one dared to step forward and clearly wished to see others make an attempt first. After all, the Ghost Spirit Sect's reputation wasn't very great, and the slightest mistake could lead to certain death. Han Li stood up on the mound, taking in a better view of the scene. Wang Tiansheng coldly laughed upon seeing the cultivators' responses, and he raised his arms towards the sky. The sky above him began to stir, and the valley's surroundings gradually became quieter. Despite the awkward atmosphere, the Mulan began to move. Over 10 Mulan spell warriors silently walked towards the huge formation behind the scholarly man surnamed Zhang and the woman surnamed Le. A trace of black qi flickered across Wang Tiansheng's face after seeing this, but soon disappeared. As for the taciturn Wei Wuya, he calmly faced Elder Zhang and looked at him. Before the Mulan spell warriors made their way into the spell formation, Elder Zhang flung his sleeve, shooting over 10 streaks of azure light from his sleeve into the sky. Wang Tiansheng then expressionlessly waved his hand and caught the lights, only to reveal tensome medallions. Although Wang Tiansheng didn't participate in the battle at the border, he already knew of the divine sage's identity. As such, he took a breath and slowly said, "Good, the quantity will suffice, please go in." Elder Zhang nodded, and several spell warriors moved from behind him, entering the spell formation. Suddenly, the Ghost Spirit Sect disciples floating in the air activated the formation and sent the Mulan into the valley in groups of 3. When Elder Zhang walked into the spell formation, he glanced at Wei Wuya and casually said, "If the target location of this transportation formation is random, then it'd be best if your sect's disciples don't encounter us." Showing no fear, Wei Wuya faced the Mulan divine sage and replied, "How could something so convenient happen in this world? If something like that truly happens, it can only be by the wills of the heavens." "The will of heavens, then so be it." Divine Sage Zhang coldly chuckled and disappeared with white light alongside 2 of his juniors. After that was said, Wang Tiansheng glanced at the empty spell formation with a trace of a scowl. When the others saw that the Mulan were able to safely use the transportation formation, they couldn't help but lose their composure. Many cultivators began to take out their Devil Fall medallions and walk towards the transportation formation. Over the span of a few minutes, the transportation formation flickered with light many times, sending over 300 people into Devil Fall Valley, about a fourth of the total number of Devil Fall medallions. As for the high-grade spirit stone at the spell formation center, it had already begun to dim. Its spiritual power appeared nearly exhausted. Han Li indifferently watched all of this as he stood on top of the mound, and made note of all the cultivators who entered the valley. Suddenly, Han Li's gaze shifted to 6 green-robed cultivators that approached the spell formation. The one leading them was the controlling spirit sect's Grand Elder, Dongmen Tu. Han Li didn't have a particularly good impression of. Although they had never engaged each other in a direct confrontation, Han Li felt that he should be careful around this person, considering his involvement in dealing with the Mulan spy, Gu Xiongpu. But with his vastly powerful abilities, Han Li didn't need to pay too much attention to him. At that moment, the 5 green-robed cultivators escorting Dongmen Tu simultaneously turned their heads in the direction of Han Li. At the same time, Han Li's assimilated second nascent soul suddenly began to intensely stir. Were it not for Han Li's quick reaction to immediately concentrate and forcefully dominate it with his spiritual sense, he feared it would have manifested on its own. At that same moment, Han Li used his spiritual sense to carefully observe the 5 green-robed cultivators. Elemental spirit nascents. These early nascent soul cultivators gave off a strange impression similar to his second nascent soul. As a result, he couldn't help but squint at them, not knowing where they came from. Of course, Dongmen Tu also noticed his escorts acting strangely, and he hurriedly turned his gaze to Han Li, happening to exchange glances with him. A trace of astonishment appeared on Dongmen Tu's face, but he soon turned his head around as if nothing had happened and walked into the spell formation. As for Wang Tiangu, he appeared greatly shocked upon seeing that Damen too was being accompanied by 5 other nascent soul cultivators. As for Wei Wuya, he closely examined several of the green-robed cultivators and wore a pensive expression. Staring at these 5 cultivators, Wang Tiansheng asked with a deep tone, "Brother Damen, these fellow Taoists are quite unfamiliar. Could you introduce them to me?" In his cunning, Damen too casually responded, "I'll be happy to once the matter with Devil Fall Valley is concluded." Wang Tiansheng inwardly cursed him, but he knew that Damen too wouldn't tell the truth. Unwilling to let this drag on, he gave the order to his disciples to teleport the 6 nascent soul cultivators in 2 groups. In the instant that Damen too was teleported, he unconsciously glanced at Han Li with a malicious expression. Although his action was well hidden, Han Li had clearly seen it with his spiritual sense. It appeared that Damen too was able to sense the spirit nascent inside his body. This would prove troublesome. With the elemental spirit nascents following him, he had suddenly become a fearsome foe. It was a pity that the wood spirit nascent still wasn't fully assimilated. It seemed that Han Li would have to be much more careful after he entered the valley. Soon after Damen too was teleported, another group of 3 appeared behind them. Han Li wore a wry smile upon seeing them. They were Senior Marshal Brother Cheng and 2 other nascent soul cultivators that were nearing the end of their lifespan. Han Li sighed and watched the 3 teleport into the valley. Afterward, his attention shifted to the high-grade spirit stone that sat at the center of the spell formation. It had already grown mostly lightless. Han Li's gaze flickered, and without any further hesitation, he soared into the sky and flew over in a streak of azure light. He soon descended in front of the spell formation and tossed his Devil Fall medallion towards Wang Tiansheng. Wei Wuya's figure blurred and he appeared 100 meters away from Han Li. "Fellow Taoist Han, you've also arrived. With your young age, your prospects are limitless. There should be no need for you brave such danger." Han Li calmly replied, "Many thanks for your kindness, Brother Wei, but there is a reason I must enter Devil Fall Valley." Wei Wuya frowned and stared at Han Li's expression for a moment more before his expression grew sullen. "Since fellow Taoist Han has decided, I won't speak of the matter further. I just hope that our goals differ." With that said, Wei Wuya blurred and reappeared back in his original position. After seeing Wei Wuya speak to this youth with such a serious tone, how could Wang Tiansheng not know who Han Li was? With a calm expression, he examined Han Li with shock filling his heart. He had heard of Han Li many years ago, when Wang Chan had suffered a massive loss which allowed Han Li to escape back when they both only possessed Foundation Establishment stage cultivations. After the passage of time, he had reappeared in the heavenly South Continent as a nascent soul cultivator. Additionally, the youth had once again developed a deep hatred towards Ghost Spirit Sect and escaped their grasp once more. Several years had passed since the incident at the Mulan Plains, while his reputation soared and he displayed abilities that left other cultivators in awe, raising him to become an existence on par with the 3 great heavenly South cultivators. When Wang Tiansheng heard about this, the matter was far from good, and he took Han Li's name to heart. Now that Han Li had arrived before them, he wished to figure out who this person was. Unfortunately for him, Han Li was already standing at the center of the spell formation with his eyes shut and a neutral expression, leaving no openings for anybody else to approach him. This caused Wang Tiansheng's heart to tremble, and he was touched with a faint sense of trepidation. Regardless, he was able to wave his hand with a relaxed posture, and the disciples in the air activated the formation, sending Han Li off in a series of hums. After a chain of teleportations, Han Li felt a wave of uneasiness, but he eventually recovered his bearings and began to examine his surroundings. He found himself near a mostly collapsed stone cliff and was surrounded by overgrown grass that reached half a person tall. In the distance, he saw a chain of short, unbroken hills. There was a person to be seen. However, this wasn't strange in the least, as Devil Fall Valley spanned hundreds of thousands of kilometers. If 2 people weren't teleported together, it would be incredibly difficult to find them. When Han Li turned around to look around about him, he couldn't help but wear an astonished expression. There was a depression not far behind Han Li. It was over 300 meters wide and completely barren, as if it wasn't created naturally. With a changed expression, Han Li released his spiritual sense and quickly searched a perimeter of 15 kilometers around him. After discovering no trace of any other cultivators, he looked at the depression and slowly made his way towards it. When Han Li arrived at the edge of the depression, he closely examined it, and soon a trace of alarm appeared on his face. This wasn't a depression, but a symmetrically round pit. The pit was filled with ash of an unknown depth, and it was impossible to see through it. Han Li stared at the large hole for a moment more with a pensive expression. He then formed an incantation gesture with his hands and swept up a 30-meter-tall gale in front of him. "Go!" He uttered the command and waved his sleeve, as the gale swept the ash from the center of the pit. The wind swept up the ash and rock everywhere it traveled. A moment later, the hole's true appearance was revealed as a slab of dark red volcanic rock that appeared incredibly smooth. This is, at a glance, Han Li realized this was something formed from high-temperature fires, likely along with the formation of the hole. Shock appeared on his face as he further thought about the matter. Could it be that something similar to a fireball created the hole? If he were to strike a stone surface with a fireball, something of a much smaller scale would be created. The result would pale in comparison to this, which would be over 100 times larger that he could create. Could it be that the abilities of an ancient cultivator were so ferocious? As Han Li lost himself in thought, he eventually sighed and shook his head. After some further thought, he believed the pit was more likely caused by some sort of fire attribute ancient treasure. But even so, this demonstrated that ancient cultivators' abilities were far greater than present cultivators. Afterwards, Han Li slowly walked around the stone pit once more, but didn't discover anything else notable about it. He then came to a stop and raised his head to the sky. As of current, it should be about noon, but there was no sun in the sky where he was teleported. Instead, it was replaced by an endless cloud of yellow haze that shined with dim light. This didn't come as a shock to Han Li, since there was some sort of restriction that covered the entire sky. He reckoned that, as of current, he wouldn't be able to fly very high or else he would trigger the restriction. Of course, Han Li still had to test his hypothesis. He took out a gold-devouring beetle from his storage pouch and tossed it into the air. Han Li then raised his head and emotionlessly watched the beetle. When it had reached about 180 meters in height, a blue lightning bolt suddenly appeared out of nowhere and struck the gold-devouring beetle. The insect promptly spun as it fell over 20 meters, but managed to unfold its wings and recover as if nothing had happened. Han Li wore a pensive expression when he saw this. After commanding the beetle to return, he got his bearings and in a flicker of light, he slowly made his way west. He didn't dare to fly quickly through this strange land for fear that he could come across a restriction or a spatial tier and lead himself into an untimely demise. As for the matter of Violet Spirit and Marquis Nanlong, Han Li moved out to prepare to handle both of their affairs. Seizing the Spirit Kindle fruit and joined together with Marquis Nanlong to kill the ancient flame toad. Although the Ghost Spirit Sect Nascent Soul Elder had found the Spirit Kindle fruit when he entered the valley, he wasn't able to precisely remember its location. It would take some time before they found it, and even if they managed to eventually find the spirit fruit, they would have to immediately refine the pill and then take it immediately. Along with the time it would take to absorb the pill's medicinal powers, they would require several days at the very least. Once Han Li acquired the inner core of the ancient flame toad, something that Nangong Wan direly needed, he could seek out the spirit kindle fruit with an unworried heart. Not to mention that he was rather interested in the remnant treasures the ancient flame toad was guarding. With those thoughts in mind, he began to spread out his spiritual sense to its fullest extent, and his eyes occasionally flickered with blue light as he employed the bright-side spirit eyes, allowing him to avoid the restrictions and spatial tiers. Although he couldn't determine where he was in the valley, he shouldn't be too far away from the other cultivators. Although the transportation formation was said to teleport randomly, the teleportation should only occur within a certain range. Han Li didn't intend on meeting with any other cultivators. He needed to head to the westmost portion of Devil Fall Valley and meet with Marquis Nanlong. According to Marquis Nanlong, although he had acquired Master Kang Kun's method to enter the valley, the method is quite dangerous and consumes a great amount of strength. The only benefit to this was being able to follow Master Kang Kun's route to the valley depths. After some deliberation, Han Li decided to use the Ghost Spirit Sect's method to enter the valley. After all, the Ghost Spirit Sect was confident in their method to enter the valley given their wanton selling of the Devil Fall medallions, and Han Li wanted to use the safer option. From what he saw, their method of entering the outer valley was as smooth as expected, but he would still have to brave a bit of danger if he were to hurry. Han Li continuously looked around as he flew, but came to a sudden stop as he looked forward and frowned. But his expression soon returned to normal, and he continued flying forward. his speed unconsciously having slowed. After flying over 300 meters, Han Li stopped and glanced into the distance. There was a white arc of light suspended in the air that was about 3 meters long and in the shape of a crescent. The arc of light was completely still and lacked any aura. Han Li closely examined the light arc, and he swept his hand against the air, sending a streak of azure sword chi towards it. Azure light ruptured in an explosion. As soon as the azure chi and the light arc contacted each other, the azure chi immediately disappeared as if devoured by the light arc. In contrast, the light arc appeared completely untouched. Han Li nodded. It appeared this was a so-called spatial tear. If they were all as visible as this one, they should be easy to avoid, but the indistinct ones were troublesome to deal with. Since he had encountered a spatial tear promptly after arriving in the valley, it only illustrated how prevalent they were. If he weren't careful, he would be certain to suffer. Han Li felt a chill as he thought this, and his body blurred. He flew a large arc around the spatial tear and continued on his way without paying it any further attention. Unbeknownst to Han Li, over 50 kilometers away a fat old man was staring at a foot-long arc of light. He muttered, "How very dangerous to think that I teleported to the side of a spatial tear. If I had teleported 30 meters closer to it, I may have died. It appears I must take extra care. There must be innumerable spatial tears in Devil Fall Valley." The old man's complexion had paled after noticing the tear, but he soon turned his attention to his surroundings. Confirming with his spiritual sense that there were no other dangers, he got his bearings and flew off. But just as he flew 20 meters away, an arc of white light suddenly appeared in his path. Before he could even scream, his body was split into two and filled the air with blood as both pieces fell to the ground. His face still wore an expression of disbelief. Just as soon as the spatial tear had lit up, it slowly faded away and vanished from sight. If anyone else were to come, they would have no way of knowing that it existed. In another area, 3 green-robed cultivators were flying back and forth around a pile of rubble. But regardless of the direction they flew, they were always blocked by a barrier of rainbow light when they reached 100 meters out. A large man with a large blade scar on his face couldn't help but shout, "This won't work. We won't be able to leave. Those ghost spirit sect wretches actually teleported us into this restriction. When we get out, we will have a proper discussion with them." A cultivator with high cheekbones stopped in the air and snorted. He coldly said, "Worry less. What does the ghost spirit sect have to fear from a small sect like ours? Remember that from the start they said the teleportation was random, and that if we were teleported into a spatial tier, we could only blame our luck. It is fortunate that, although this restriction is powerful, it isn't an offensive type. We should be able to slowly whittle away at it and escape." The scarred man shook his head and said, "But as a result, the other treasures in the valley will have already been taken. With our cultivation, we will only be able to search the outer valley for treasures. It would only be suicide to search the inner valley. We had to spend the entirety of our wealth in order to buy those Devil Fall medallions." After some hesitation, the high-cheeked cultivator said, "If that's the case, then let's destroy the restriction by force. Although it appears this restriction is somewhat profound, it is something located in the outer valley. It shouldn't prove to be powerful beyond reach. Although we might lose a bit of our magic power, we'll manage to get out." The final member of their group, a tanned cultivator, paused in thought and eventually nodded. "Fine. Then so be it. Second brother, you have an offensive-type magic treasure. We'll have to rely on you. Both of us will be assisting to the side. It is best to leave this matter to me. With only a few blows, I'll get rid of this wretched thing." The large man was roused by these words and spat out a ball of yellow light. It was a small, finely cut stone block that was only an inch long. The large man formed a hand incantation and pointed at the block. Suddenly, the stone block surged through the air and grew to a meter in length. The other two then released a red and white streak of light, revealing them to be 2 sparkling flying swords. "Go!" the loud man roared. The stone block revolved once in the air and struck the rainbow light barrier in a burst of light. The 2 swords transformed into streaks of light and followed after the stone block. As expected, the stone block magic treasure was exceptional. Before it even struck, it carried the faint sounds of a storm. Soon, a booming explosion sounded out, accompanied by a pulse of various colored light while the nearby earth swayed. When the other 2 saw the stone block's might, they wore a hopeful smile, but their smiles soon froze on their faces. In the intertwining lights, the rainbow light suddenly grew brighter and suppressed the 3 magic treasures for a time before they were struck back with a clear ring sounding out from the rainbow light. In the 3's alarm, they hastily regained control of their magic treasures and glanced at each other with expressions of dismay. The ferocity of this restriction was far beyond what they had anticipated. The large man snorted, but just as he thought to say something further, the rainbow light surrounding them suddenly flashed and turned red. Before the three even realized what was going on, the restriction began to condense clouds of flame, suddenly raising the temperature within the area. What's going on? Wasn't this restriction not supposed to be an offensive type? The scarred large man shouted in alarm, but the other two weren't able to answer him. The fiery clouds above them had already begun to press down on them. In that moment, the hooded member amongst the three began to summon magic treasures all around his body in an attempt to protect himself. He also slapped several talismans on his body, forming various colored barriers twinkling around him. The fiery clouds then engulfed the three. Soon, three miserable screams were heard, only for silence to follow shortly afterwards. A moment later, the fire cloud disappeared and the light barrier turned back to normal. There was no one amongst the rubble, only three magic treasures shining with greatly dimmed radiance. While there weren't many cultivators that had encountered such misfortune when they first entered Devilfall Valley, over half of them that did had died. Whenever one encountered misfortune in the valley, they immediately feared for their life. There was even a nascent soul elder of a mid-grade sect that perished as a result of a spatial tear in a moment of carelessness. Ignorant of what had happened to the various other cultivators, Han Li was treading with great care regardless. But at that moment, he encountered a pleasant surprise. Standing in the air above a wasteland with his hands behind his back, Han Li was glancing below him with eyes that brilliantly flickered with blue light. If someone were to see the blue light shining from his eyes, they would think of him as demonic, not that Han Li would pay them any heed. It appeared as if there was nothing in front of him. He found nothing with his spiritual sense either, but with his bright-sight spirit eyes, Han Li was able to spot a meter-long arc of light. It was about 40 meters ahead of him and shined with a faint light. Han Li took a deep breath and the blue light in his eyes slightly weakened as his expression wavered. He was now completely certain that the bright spirit eyes were able to see spatial tears that his spiritual sense wasn't able to detect. This pleasant surprise justified the large quantity of green liquid he had used to create the bright-sight spirit water over the years. Result, he was now able to cleanly avoid the most common danger in Devilfall Valley. The sole problem was that he could only detect spatial tears when using the ability to its fullest extent. He would overlook a spatial tear if he were even slightly careless. As for the magic power consumption of the bright-sight spirit eyes, it wasn't much to speak of. However, it would be troublesome if Marquis Nanlong noticed something strange about his eyes after he met up with him. Han Li didn't wish for others to know about this ability. Han Li lowered his head in thought, and something soon came to mind. He slapped his storage pouch, and he took out a cloak that sparkled with azure light. This cloak wasn't ordinary clothing. It was a top-grade magic tool that Han Li had acquired in the war. This item had no other function than to conceal one's face, preventing any others from looking at one's true appearance. Of course, this effect didn't need a continuous supply of magic power, and it wouldn't work against those with a far higher cultivation than him. Apart from the Mulan Divine Sage and Wei Wuya, there shouldn't be anyone that was capable of seeing through it. After properly wearing the cloak, Han Li took another glance at the indistinct spatial tear and flew past it in a streak of azure light. In a dense forest with trees reaching into the sky, there was a tall woman with a common appearance that was currently flying around the forest at a low altitude. While her face wasn't particularly special, her eyes were exceptionally bright and clear. She occasionally glanced around as if looking for something. After a short time, the woman eventually passed through the forest and arrived at the other end. She came to a sudden stop with an expression of surprise. It seems this isn't the place. The signs left behind by the Ghost Spirit Sect elder aren't here. It should be in another place. But to have me find the spirit kindle fruit and wait for him, does he have other goals inside Devilfall Valley? The woman then raised her head and glanced towards the yellow sky. Her eyes seemed vacant as if she were absorbed in her thoughts. Suddenly, her expression stirred and she shot back into the forest in a blur. She concealed her presence with several techniques, hid below a huge tree, and then remained completely still. She saw 3 different colored streaks of light flying across the distance. Their speed wasn't fast, but it was clear that there were 3 old men traveling together. In an instant, the 3 streaks of light arrived above the forest. The silver-haired old man amongst them sensed something and glanced down toward the woman's hiding spot. What, has Brother Cheng discovered something? a purple-robed old man with a wrinkled face asked. The silver-haired old man replied, "It's nothing. There's just a core formation woman hidden down below in the forest. It seems she doesn't wish to meet anybody." The purple-robed old man couldn't help but excitedly ask, "Since this woman is being so careful, could it be there are some treasures hidden inside?" The third old man, whose face was covered with azure chi, calmly said, "Brother Lin must be dreaming. This forest has no trace of a restriction, and there is only a core formation cultivator below us, and it's a woman at that. Given how dangerous Devil Fall Valley is, it is only natural for her to avoid us. Let's not involve ourselves and continue our search for treasure. We had best look for the treasures in the outer valley quickly, or we will have to head into the valley's depths." The retort hadn't angered the purple-robed old man. Instead, he smiled and agreed, "Brother O's words hold reason. We don't need to pay any attention to the female cultivator. We can travel faster through this wretched place, but we still cannot use our full speed. We won't be able to search through such a large area in a short amount of time. We can't waste our time." The silver-haired old man also nodded, and they flew past the dense forest. When the woman saw that they left, she carefully walked out of the forest and glanced in the direction that they flew off in. Violet Spirit muttered to herself, "That silver-haired old man should be Brother Han's senior martial brother. I didn't expect to find him here. Fortunately, it was only a false alarm." She and Han Li had agreed that she would first seek out traces related of the Spirit Kindle fruit in the outer valley. Afterwards, they would meet up and search for the Spirit Kindle fruit together. Violet Spirit had originally agreed to this condition with delight, but had felt somewhat puzzled by Han Li's condition. However, she knew that his other affairs had nothing to do with her, and as such, she didn't ask too much about the matter. As of current, she hadn't found her target in the forest. She hesitated for a moment before rushing in the direction the three old men had taken. In another forest of Devil Fall Valley, there were 6 black-robed ghost sect disciples that were searching through it. Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan were among them. In the forest above, there was a pale old man floating motionlessly in the air. As for the ghost spirit sect master Wang Tiangu and the other ghost spirit sect disciples, they were nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, a cry of alarm echoed through a certain portion of the forest. Soon after, a disciple's cheery voice arrived at the old man's ear. "I've found it. It's here." The old man's expression stirred and he flew over in a streak of black light. When the others heard this, they all rushed towards him. "Where?" the old man coldly asked as he stood in the air above the disciple, glancing around. The disciple pointed to one of the trees and respectfully said, "Elder Zhang, it's here." Elder Zhang's gaze followed the disciple's finger and he raised his brow. The large tree appeared rather peculiar. Not only did its roots divide into two, but a thick branch extended to either side of it. The tree appeared almost like a huge person. The old man nodded and said with a stiff face, "Not bad. This tree could be the one, and if it actually is, we will heavily reward you when we leave the valley." When the disciple heard this, he hastily replied with delighted thanks. Elder Zhang slowly descended and flew twice around the huge tree and then stopped at its side. He stared at it for a moment more and grasped his fingers towards the tree. A trace of black yin qi slowly flew out from the tree and shot into his hands. Elder Zhang smiled and commanded, "It is truly here. Call for the others to come." As time passed by, the other cultivators in the valley became further scattered. Apart from a few that had a specific objective in mind, they all began to randomly search in hopes of finding treasure. But to the disappointment of a majority of the cultivators, only a few were lucky in their search around the outer valley. A majority were left without any gains. As a result, most of them concluded that the rumors were false and all the true treasures in the valley lay deep in its depths. The more impatient and confident cultivators began to slowly make their way towards the valley's center. As for Han Li, his first day in Devil Fall Valley was quite calm. As he traveled, he wasted no time searching for treasures. There was nowhere that was safe. It was quite possible that anywhere he went was protected with restrictions, so he found it best to stay away. Although he flew at a slow speed, he gradually grew closer to the location he had agreed upon with Marquis Nanlong and became aware of his location in the valley. On the west side of Devil Fall Valley, there was a small brown mountain with 2 men on top of it. A white-robed old man who had a kind face was sitting cross-legged, while the other was standing. He wore embroidered robes and a tall crown, and his facial hair dropped down to his chest. They were Marquis Nanlong and the Heaven Peak Sect elder Lu Weiying. Marquis Nanlong held both of his hands behind his back as he stood 20 meters in front of Lu Weiying. He appeared to be aloofly looking into the distance, but a trace of worry appeared in his eyes. Lu Weiying sensed Marquis Nanlong's worry and said, "Brother Nanlong, there is no need to be so worried. He could have teleported to an area farther away and will take more time to arrive. Did we not personally see him teleport through the spell formation?" Marquis Nanlong sighed and turned his head to the old man. With a helpless tone, he said, "Your words aren't untrue. However, you should also know that the many dangers of Devilfall Valley aren't easily dealt with, no matter how vast one's abilities are. We need this person or our journey to Devilfall Valley will be a waste." Lu Weiying opened his eyes and grumbled. "We do need the yin-yang ring in order to go through the Great North Essence lights, but is the ancient flame toad truly that powerful? If it isn't, we should have just taken the ring instead of bringing him along." Marquis Nanlong frowned and said, "I hadn't personally witnessed how powerful it was, but from Master Kang Kun's records, it is said to be exceptionally fearsome. It is best that we find a cultivator with the ability to restrain the beast, or it will take too much effort and consume too much of our strength. I don't want to leave myself open in a place as dangerous as this." After a moment of consideration, Lu Weiying said, "Your words are reasonable. It seems you've grown more careful and wary after what happened in the Mulan Plains. But from the records I've read about the ancient flame toad, it wasn't well known in times of antiquity. It was even said that it shouldn't be very hard to deal with, but since Master Kang Kun had vouched for its formidability, I reckon this beast should be a mutant variant." Possessing another thought in mind, Marquis Nanlong didn't entirely agree. A mutant variant. It's possible. However, I also feel that the beast didn't have any natural predators in the valley and cultivated for countless years, resulting in its vast power. Lu Weiying closed his eyes once more and slowly said, "Since matters have already reached this stage, there is no point in further speaking about it. We must eliminate the flame toad either way. As for the passage leading to the flame toad, it is covered in Great North Essence lights. One wouldn't be able to go through it without any preparations. We don't have to worry about someone else finding the ancient cultivator remains before us." Marquis Nanlong smiled after hearing Lu Weiying speak so calmly. Just as he thought to say something in return, his expression suddenly changed, and he hastily turned around to look at the sky. He saw an azure light slowly streaking towards them. He's finally arrived. Familiar with Han Li's flying light, Marquis Nanlong was able to recognize him at a glance and wore a smile on his face. When Lu Weiying heard him, he hastily opened his eyes and stood up. It appeared the old man was also somewhat worried despite his calm appearance. The azure streak appeared to be flying carefully. After a while, it finally arrived before them. The azure light faded away to reveal a cloaked silhouette. Astonished that his spiritual sense wasn't able to see through the cloak, Marquis Nanlong hesitantly asked, "Is that you, fellow Taoist Han?" "What? Is there someone else that has agreed to meet you here?" Han Li rubbed the hood of his mantle and smiled. At the same time, his gaze flickered to Lu Weiying. Lu Weiying also discovered the peculiarity of Han Li's cloak, but appeared indifferent. "Fellow Taoist must be joking. Brother Lu and I have been waiting for you for a while." Marquis Nanlong was relieved to hear Han Li's voice, but he was somewhat baffled at the cloak that Han Li wore. Seeing that Han Li hadn't mentioned it, he didn't ask about it as it was only a minor matter. The three then began to discuss how to eliminate the ancient flame toad. Before arriving at the ancient flame toad's lair, they needed to first enter the valley depths. The valley depths was actually a large area at the heart of Devilfall Valley that was confined within a particularly formidable ancient restriction. As such, there wasn't really a path to enter in there. As light revolved around the border of the valley depths, one could easily find over a dozen paths inside of varying sizes. However, these paths were all layered with multiple restrictions. If one wished to pass them, they had to dissolve the restrictions one by one or face the consequences of using brute force. The might of these ancient restrictions was fantastical and they all were merciless. One was better off if they didn't strike at them. If a restriction was attacked, it would retaliate without restraint. In the past, Master Kang Kun had studied these restrictions for many days with his deep understanding of spell formations, but he had eventually given up. Although it was still possible to dissolve these restrictions, it was too time-consuming to attempt it alone. Later on, Master Kang Kun came up with an idea. With a chance coincidence, he found a secret path concealed by Great North Essence lights. The path was well hidden, and the Great North Essence lights would exterminate any cultivators who wandered in without any prior knowledge. But with the yin-yang ring in hand, it should be quite easy to enter the valley depths. Han Li and the two decided to immediately take off into the sky and fly directly towards the valley depths. Just as they ascended into the sky, Marquis Nanlong slapped his storage pouch and took out several bells, several inches large and all differing in color. He then hung them at his waist, much to Han Li's surprise. Seeing that Han Li was curious, Marquis Nanlong explained, "These are response bells. So long as an area around a spatial tier fluctuates, they will sound out. Although it cannot respond to all spatial tiers, it will give a warning for most of them." Han Li nodded, and the three began a streak through the sky. As they flew towards the valley depths, the bells proved quite useful. Whenever a spatial tier appeared, they would immediately ring, alerting the three and preventing them from running across the tiers. However, these spatial tiers had to be detectable through some way or another. If they were truly incorporeal, the bells would give no warning. Knowing this, Han Li used his bright-sight spirit eyes to look for any invisible spatial tiers. As a result, he discovered one to their side. When they flew past it, the bells did not ring. Having seen this, Han Li grew far warier. However, Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying were able to fly faster and with more ease due to the convenience of the bell. Since the three didn't encounter any more invisible spatial tiers on their way, Han Li didn't need to provide a warning, and he happily kept silent. Nearly a day later, they arrived outside the valley depths in front of an unfamiliar mountain ridge. The mountain ridge was a continuous link of over 10 small mountains, appearing to be a miniature mountain range spanning tens of kilometers. Behind the mountain ridge, there was a crimson light that blocked the yellow sky. It appeared demonic. That must be the valley depths. The crimson light should be an extremely formidable restriction. We cannot provoke it or we will surely suffer. Although this was the first time Marquis Nanlong had seen the crimson light, he immediately knew to be wary of it. Han Li squinted and looked at the crimson light without emotion. Given how strange it was, he wouldn't have been in a rush to approach it regardless of what Marquis Nanlong said. But for what purpose did the ancient devil cultivators arrange so many formidable restrictions around Devilfall Valley? Just what was this valley's original purpose, and what secrets were they guarding? The valley may as well have been a prison. On a whim, these thoughts appeared in Han Li's mind, but soon he laughed at himself. What kind of monster would need such a huge valley as a prison? That was impossible. It was more likely that this was a stronghold for the devil cultivators. At that moment, Marquis Nanlong led the way, flying directly towards two of the mountains on the mountain ridge. After a moment, Marquis Nanlong raised his hand and the three stopped, slowly floating down to the ground. There was green grass and mountain stone ahead of them with huge trees and overgrown vines. It all appeared completely ordinary. Despite the excitement on his face, Marquis Nanlong coolly said, "We're here. It didn't look like this originally. When Master Kang Kun arrived here, he deployed an illusion technique to conceal the passage entrance. I'll dissolve the illusion now." He waved his sleeve and released a white jade pendant. It circled once above his head before stopping. Then after he muttered an incantation, he formed a hand gesture and struck the jade pendant with several spell seals of varying colors. All of the spell seals were cleanly absorbed by the jade pendant, and soon after, white light brilliantly glowed from it and it trembled, releasing a clear ring. With a loud shout, a large white mist emerged from the jade pendant and swept away at everything in front of it. An astonishing change occurred as the mountain rocks and the rest of the scenery began to distort, as if a painting was being torn apart. With a ring, the white light swept away the scenery, and it returned back into the jade pendant before disappearing. Han Li and the other two then stood in front of an unfamiliar scene. The verdant and wild scenery completely faded away and was replaced with a strange scene. There were now white stones everywhere, each of which were shaped into ovals and sleek. The larger ones were the size of a skull, and the smaller ones were the size of a fist. In the distance, there was a large expanse of dense gray mist that couldn't be seen through. However, the gray mist was confined to an area of around 300 meters with crimson light to either side of it. The light pushed into the mist as it were a tide, but the mist would push back as if it were an embankment. Lu Weiying slowly asked, "This is the passage that you were talking about?" Marquis Nanlong hesitated for a moment and said, "That's right, it's here. Does Brother Lu feel that something is wrong?" Lu Weiying glanced at the mist and said, "The crimson light is certain to be the inner valley's restriction. However, the mist seems unordinary. Did Master Kang Kun's records mention anything about the mist?" Marquis Nanlong pondered and said, "No, he hadn't mentioned the mist. It shouldn't be too important." Lu Weiying shook his head and wore a solemn expression. "I feel that the gray mist isn't ordinary. It's better to be careful." Han Li then said, "Then let's test if there is any problem with it." Marquis Nanlong stroked his palm. "It is exactly as fellow Taoist Han says. I have trained many eternal flight orioles and normally use them to search for medicinal herbs, but they will do in testing the mist as well. Lu Weiying didn't oppose him, so Marquis Nanlong took out an exquisite spirit beast pouch and flung it into the air. With a low cry, a small bird with golden feathers shot into the air from the pouch, and it began to circle in the air. Marquis Nanlong raised his hand and tossed out an azure talisman, striking the small bird with it. The bird then spread out its wings, and a small azure barrier appeared on its body. With a cry, the small bird shot into the gray mist in a streak of golden light. Before the bird reached the mist, Han Li's eyes had already begun to shine with blue light. Making full use of the bright-side spirit eyes, he glanced around, and his expression made a sudden change. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying were completely focused on the small bird. The eternal flight oriole headed straight into the gray mist and disappeared. Since Han Li wasn't able to clearly see into the mist, he didn't send his spiritual sense into it due to carefulness. He simply turned to watch Marquis Nanlong's expression, who had closed his eyes and focused on his connection to the bird. His expression was calm, clearly revealing that nothing had happened to the bird. Just as Han Li thought this, Marquis Nanlong's body suddenly trembled, and he opened his eyes with a pale complexion. Lu Weiying stared at Marquis Nanlong and hurriedly asked, "What, did something happen?" Marquis Nanlong replied, "There is a monster in that mist that swallowed the bird whole. It seems to be." Han Li and Lu Weiying glanced at each other with astonishment. Marquis Nanlong pondered for a long while before finally answering, "It seems to be a huge python. The gray mist should be a demonic fog that it spat out." A huge python? That seems strange. Why hadn't Master Kang Kun's records mentioned it? Could it be? The huge python was something that arrived at the passageway after his time here. Han Li finished Lu Weiying's speculative words. "Yes, that was exactly what I meant." Marquis Nanlong nodded. "Your words are reasonable, but how can something like a huge python safely exist inside Devilfall Valley? It seems to be an extraordinary demon beast, likely some ancient variant. If we do not slay it, we won't be able to enter the valley depths. This will be quite troublesome." With a cold glint flickering from his eyes, Lu Weiying said, "It's no problem. Since the gray mist isn't a restriction, we don't need to be too fearful of it. With our combined powers, this ancient beast shouldn't be difficult to deal with. I reckon it won't be much more powerful than the ancient flame toad. We may not know how powerful the ancient beast is, but we will have to eliminate it in order to continue. Let us deal with it together." Marquis Nanlong then opened his mouth and spat out a small sword flickering with golden light. The old man rolled his hands and summoned a brilliant white formation flag into his hand. When Han Li saw this, he bitterly smiled, seeing that the two had already came to a decision to immediately attack. Han Li suddenly faced an empty area and his expression sank, saying, "I don't object to dealing with the beast, but before we start, how about we first ask for this fellow Taoist to come out of hiding? How long does your esteemed self plan on hiding there?" He flicked his finger, sending several streaks of azure sword chi to strike where he was looking. In a series of explosions, a silhouette covered in yellow light suddenly appeared, holding a large shield in his hand. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying were dumbstruck at the sight of this. The silhouette in the yellow light was a lanky man that appeared over 40 years old. He hastily bowed to the three nascent soul cultivators, but his face was filled with terror. "This is a misunderstanding. Seniors, please do not be angry. I only just arrived here and will immediately depart." As soon as Lu Weiying saw this person, he shouted in alarm, "Huang Tianming, it's you." A trace of hostility appeared on Marquis Nanlong's face, and he sternly asked, "What? Brother Lu recognizes this person?" Lu Weiying's expression grew unsightly as he stared at the lanky man and coldly said, "This cultivator belongs to a small sect of our righteous Tao alliance. His cultivation isn't anything special, but I heard he had acquired an ancient concealment talisman that is wondrously effective. I didn't think this matter to be true, but here he was, completely concealed from us. Seniors, I only followed you because I was curious about your techniques." Hearing that they spoke with an unfriendly tone, the lanky man blanched. "Since you secretly followed behind us, you can't be up to anything good. Brother Lu, he is a member of your righteous Tao alliance. What do you want to do with him?" Lu Weiying's face turned expressionless and he squinted his eyes. "I intend on killing him." With that said, his body blurred and he disappeared without a trace. When the lanky man heard this, he felt his heart drop. Out of complete fear of the three nascent soul cultivators, he covered himself in light and took to the skies. At that moment, Lu Weiying had used some sort of movement technique, and appeared where the lanky man had originally stood. He raised his head to coldly look at the streak of yellow light that was flying away. Then, with a tremble of his hand, he launched the white flag into the air. The flag turned into a white wind as it chased the yellow light with amazing speed, whistling through the air. Soon the lanky man was overtaken. In an attempt to block the white wind, he raised his shield. After a series of fierce trembles, the shield shattered into fragments as the wind pushed through, cutting the lanky man into 1,000 pieces, filling the sky with a bloody mist as his last miserable scream spread through the air. When Lu Weiying saw this, he nodded and waved his hand, summoning the white wind back into his hand as a white flag. Marquis Nanlong clapped and smiled. Good, with that settled, we don't have to fear about this matter leaking. Lu Weiying casually replied, it was nothing. That mere core formation cultivator was deserving of more than just death for daring to follow us. He then reached towards the blood mist and summoned a faint yellow talisman and a storage pouch into his grasp. Lu Weiying took a quick look at the items before putting them away. We were truly lucky to have fellow Taoist Han here, or we would have encountered unexpected troubles. It is no wonder Brother Han has such a grand reputation, given that he was able to see through such a powerful concealment technique. Han Li smiled and aloofly said, it was nothing but luck. You two weren't able to see through it only because he snuck in while you two were distracted. When Marquis Nanlong heard Han Li's modest words, he shook his head and said nothing more. At that moment, Lu Weiying returned to them wearing a serious expression. Let us move quickly and avoid having any other unexpected troubles appear. Han Li nodded, and with a flip of his hand, a sparkling formation flag appeared in his grasp. Rubbing his chin, he proposed, when we kill the huge python, it will cause quite a commotion. I will first lay down an isolation formation so that the disturbances of the battle remain within the restriction. This way, we won't have to worry about any of the cultivators nearby. Lu Weiying smiled and couldn't help but offer a word of praise. Brother Han is truly an attentive person. That will be for the best. Han Li immediately flew off and began to arrange formation flags one after another. A short time later, he had finished placing down a large spell formation. The spell formation's main purpose was to dampen sound and spiritual chi fluctuations. With such a specific and simple function, it was able to be placed down in a short amount of time. When Han Li returned to them, Lu Weiying waved the flag in his hand and calmly said, since fellow Taoist Han has finished laying down the formation, I will use the hurricane flag to disperse the fog. That way the python will have nowhere to hide. With that said, he tossed the flag into the air and began to mutter an incantation. When Marquis Nanlong saw this, he pointed to the small golden sword in front of him. Suddenly, the sword flew through the air and revolved once before brilliantly glowing with golden light. In the blink of an eye, the sword expanded to a length of 20 meters as it floated above him. Lu Weiying finished his incantation and pointed to the spell flag. Trembling, the flag suddenly unfolded, shining with a blinding light. Gusts of wind repeatedly blew around it like a storm, eventually gathering enough force to condense into 10 or so white wind dragons, all rushing towards the mist with overbearing momentum. As for Marquis Nanlong's huge golden sword, it shot out with a hum and began to revolve above the mist. It seemed Marquis Nanlong was planning to wait for the mist to disperse before striking at the ancient beast with a thunderous blow as soon as it appeared. Han Li silently flung out his sleeve, summoning a small bell that flashed with silver light and flew off into the distance in a flash of light. The wind dragons seemed to race each other as they struck headfirst into the mist. The gray mist roiled for a spell before being torn apart by a tornado from within. However, the dispersion of the mist only lasted for a short moment as a strange hiss filled the air. Suddenly, a muffled boom sounded through the mist. A huge snake tail with the thickness of a water jar suddenly tossed one of the wind dragons from the mist and dispersed the tornado. Then with two more thuds, the snake tail easily smashed two more wind dragons from within. When Lu Weiying saw this, he was shocked and immediately grasped his hands in a strange incantation gesture, uttering, "Explode!" The remaining wind dragons suddenly flashed with white light and ruptured. The explosive winds devastated the mist, scattering most of it with ferocious gales and revealing the monster that laid within. It was coiled up and appeared to be the size of a mountain. With its body revealed, the golden sword took the opportunity to silently strike at it. As this occurred, Han Li shot a spell seal at the silver bell. In a brilliant flash of light, it suddenly grew 3 meters tall. With a clear ring, a silver wave suddenly rushed out from the shining bell and moved to engulf the huge python in a joint attack with the huge golden sword. The python was slow to react and simply further shrunk into its coil in response to the attacks, remaining still. Marquis Nanlong was overjoyed by the sight of this and poured even more spiritual power into his sword, enlarging it slightly further. But before the golden sword could strike, a layer of green light suddenly enveloped the python's body without a warning. A huge boom sounded out as golden and green light intertwined, but soon the green light overwhelmed the golden sword and repelled it. As that happened, the three cultivators were shocked. Immediately after the golden sword was repealed, the silver sound wave struck the python's barrier and was scattered without effort. The two attacks seemed to have awakened it, and it slowly withdrew its head to look at Han Li and the others. At that moment, the gray mist had already cleanly scattered, and the huge python had revealed itself before them. The python had a body as black as iron. It was over 200 meters long and was exceptionally thick with black palm-sized scales covering its body. It had faint green serpent eyes that currently held an ominous glint. Han Li felt his heart tremble. Just as he thought to recall his silver bell, the huge python suddenly extended itself in a blur, and the silver bell that was 100 meters away from it disappeared without a trace. Before Han Li realized what had happened, Marquis Nanlong's huge golden sword also disappeared from the sky with only a blur from the python. At that moment, Han Li had already processed what had happened. The huge python had extended itself with fantastical speed, swallowing the treasures in the blink of an eye. It happened so fast that they were unable to react. Han Li grimaced. The python was giant, but its movements were still amazingly fast. When Marquis Nanlong saw that the sword was swallowed, his alarm was soon replaced with joy as he had spent over 100 years tempering his linked magic treasure. The huge snake's exterior defenses may be formidable, but since it had taken the initiative to swallow the sword into its stomach, wasn't it seeking its own death? With that thought, Marquis Nanlong hastily commanded the golden flying sword to display its full might within the python's stomach and directly cleave through the beast. But in that short time, his expression froze. Although his magic treasure was still connected to his spiritual sense, it was restrained within the huge python's stomach and didn't budge in the slightest. In that moment, he couldn't help but grow nervous. After all, if his own magic treasure suffered any damage, his consciousness would be heavily damaged as well. Fellow Taoists, my flying sword has been restrained. This python is no ordinary beast. Be careful. With that said, Marquis Nanlong solemnly sighed and he raised his hand. A dark green ring flew off from his finger and floated in front of him. The ring pulsed with light and was faintly inscribed with various talisman characters. Lu Weiying was alarmed to discover that their magic treasures had failed, and he hastily attempted to recall his spell flag. Then, with a wave of his hand, he released several talismans into the air, and they soon burst with white light, transforming in tens of blinding white fireballs that floated in front of him. Han Li astonishedly glanced at the white fireballs and felt some familiarity towards them, but now was not the time to think of the matter. He then turned his head around and slapped his storage pouch, summoning 4 streaks of white light around him. 3 wolves, 2 flame oxen, and a green snake appeared in front of him. They were the 6 puppets that he had acquired from Taoist heaven crystal form, the grand trade meet. After he acquired them, he had yet to truly use them. Now that he faced this formidable ancient python, it was a good opportunity to test their strength. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying saw Han Li's puppets and momentarily revealed a trace of surprise. The 3 were all vastly experienced cultivators. With a solemn exchange of glances, they all executed their various abilities in a joint attack against the python. However, an ominous glint began to condense from the python's eyes as it stared at the 3 cultivators. It raised its head and spat out a mouthful of liquid towards them, filling the air with a fishy scent. In their alarm, the 3 hastily raised light barriers around them and held their breaths. In the next moment, they discovered that while the fishy scent was putrid, it wasn't poisonous. Regardless, it had still caused them to hesitate. In that moment of delay, the huge python widely opened its mouth and began to suddenly inhale, expanding its body. In the blink of an eye, the entirety of the stone and earth in front of the python was sucked into its mouth. The 3 cultivators were caught off guard, and they felt a huge force pulling on them. They were rendered completely immobile as they resisted being sucked into Python's mouth. Han Li's 6 puppets were brought to the python's mouth in the blink of an eye, offering no resistance to the attractive force. A trace of surprise appeared on Han Li's face, but his heart remained calm. Azure light flashed from his body, causing it to grow incredibly heavy as it sunk into the ground. Then, with a mental command, the 6 puppets brought to the python's side began to attack. The red oxen's horns began to flash with red light and shot 4 beams of light into the python's gaping mouth. Just as the python confidently believed that it could suck Han Li and the others into its stomach, it was struck at its exposed tongue. Red light flashed and a series of thuds soon followed. The huge python groaned and closed its mouth. Although the damage to its tongue was uncertain, it had stopped breathing in for the time being. During that moment of pause, Han Li regained control of the 3 white wolf puppets. Their bodies brightly glowed with white light, and they regained their bearing on the ground with claws glowing with several inches of light. The wolves then brandished its vicious fangs before blurring from sight, flying towards the beast in streaks of light. Clang sounded out as the wolves struck the python's head. For some unknown reason, the green light hadn't appeared when the wolves struck, but the wolves' shining claws and incisive fangs weren't able to harm the black scales. They were only able to leave behind white marks. Then 2 of the wolves immediately blurred and split up, shooting towards the huge python's eyes. They were bare and without the protection of scales. With a quick purple blur, 2 muffled thuds sounded out. The 2 white wolves were scattered with a fast lightning flick of the python's tongue and were sent flying. The building-sized head of the python tilted to the side and began to close its mouth on the white wolf puppets. But just as it attempted to swallow them, the green snake puppet suddenly grew to 40 meters in size and pounced at it. Additionally, the 2 red oxen had shot out another attack from their horns. Provoked by the puppet's strikes, the huge python roared and it quickly swayed its head, spouting a black mist from its nostrils. In the blink of an eye, its entire head disappeared from view. As for 2 of the white wolf puppets, they had taken this opportunity to run away. But suddenly, 2 figures shot out from the black mist and held down the 2 white wolves. They were 2 snake heads that appeared completely identical to the first. This had all happened in the blink of an eye. By the time the cultivators realized what happened, the black chi had already disappeared to reveal the python's true form. This is a 3-headed ebony snake. How is this possible? The 3 shouted with disbelief. They faced a 3-headed python that was furiously glaring at them. The center python head was hissing with its tongue as the other 2 heads were chomping down on 2 of the wolf puppets. Then the still air rippled as soon as the word explode was uttered. With 2 huge booms, the puppets in the snake's jaws suddenly shined with blinding white light. Upon seeing the white wolf puppets had been restrained, Han Li immediately formed an incantation gesture and ordered his puppets to self-detonate without any hesitation. While the scales of the 3 huge pythons may be incredibly hardy, the insides of their mouths were a different story. Given that the white wolf puppets were crafted from countless precious materials, the power of their detonations were nothing to underestimate. As expected, the 2 serpent heads screamed in unbearable pain, but the middle serpent head was completely unaffected by the explosions, apart from being further enraged. In a blur of black, the green snake puppet flying towards it was flung 40 meters back by a wave of the python's tail. At that same moment, it moved forward and chomped down on one of the red ox puppets, shattering it to pieces and denying Han Li the opportunity to detonate it. As for Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying, they had finally awoken from their shock after seeing that Han Li's puppets continued to fight. Lu Weiying was the first to act, sending his tens of brilliant white fireballs into the sky. As for Marquis Nanlong, he waved his hand and struck the dark green ring he had summoned with a spell seal. Soon, the ring began to blur and split into 2, then 4, then 8. In a single breath, the ring had created over 100 phantoms of itself. With the true ring mixed among them, they shot forward in a wave of green light. Han Li calmly waved his hand and summoned a pitch-black item that swelled in the air above him. In a flash of black light, it had transformed into a mountain that was over 40 meters tall and only continued to grow under Han Li's command. It was the 1,000-fold mountain. Given the massive size and extraordinary defenses of the ancient python, this treasure should be more appropriate in dealing with it. With its incredible speed, Han Li first had to restrain it before he would be able to land a strike. Just as Han Li pondered over how to do this, the python's left and right heads seemed to have recovered from the previous explosions and released 2 beams of gray light from their mouths. Lu Weiying's white fireballs ruptured upon being struck, but the beams of gray light found themselves at a deadlock with the resulting wave of flames from the ruptured fireballs. As for the dark green rings, they swept past the battle between the wave of white flames and gray beams, while Han Li's 1,000-fold mountain slowly followed after them. The huge python felt threatened by the barrage of green light, and its center head howled. Its body glowed with a layer of green light before widely opening its mouth and pouncing forward, sweeping away the dark green ring phantasms. But one of the rings hiding in the rear dodged out of the way, and in a blur, it appeared above the python's head. Light shined brightly from the ring as it transformed into a streak of green chi, striking down with thunderous momentum. Suddenly, the dark green ring massively expanded and constricted the huge python with all its might, sinking deep into the python's flesh. The python suddenly felt that 7 inches of its flesh were constrained, and felt an immense wave of pain radiating from the area. The main python head began to wildly thrash about, as if desperate to break free from the green ring's restriction. The 2 other heads were also affected by the pain, and were unable to sustain the beams of gray light that were restraining the white wave of flames. When Lu Weiying saw this, his expression brightened, and he took advantage of the opportunity to command the white flames forward. The wave of white flames surged to over 40 meters tall and engulfed the huge python. However, the green light covering the huge python's body was formidable and held firm against the white flames. While the dark green ring may be restricting its head, its body had yet to suffer any damage. Suddenly, black light began to shine above the python as a black mountain about 100 meters tall appeared above it. The mountain began to revolve in the air, releasing black clouds below it and trapping the huge python. The huge python turned sluggish within the black clouds as if weighed down by an immense pressure. Using the opportunity given, the black mountain began to fall. Sensing that matters were far from good, the python raised each of its heads with strained effort and released several balls of light towards the sky to block the black mountain's descent. But before they could reach the mountain, they were dissolved by the black clouds surrounding them. Unwilling to let matters stand and wait for death, the huge python used the entirety of its strength to slap its tail downward and launch itself out from within the black clouds. But at that moment, the white flames surrounding its body suddenly turned into several thick chains and wrapped around its body. The huge python was only able to fly about 30 meters before it came crashing to the ground. Eventually, the mountain smashed down on it, and the entire area around it brilliantly glowed with black light, preventing anyone from seeing what was happening within. The python's head screamed wretchedly before the mountain smashed to the ground with a deafening tremble. Marquis Nanlong revealed a smile and Lu Weiying sighed. However, Han Li was frowning as he watched the scene before him. Black light slightly faded away to reveal the black mountain. The huge python still wasn't entirely dead, as there was still one head that wasn't crushed. It was screaming as it waved its head back and forth with all its might. The immense vitality it displayed as it flailed about in its craze was a sight to behold. Lu Weiying snorted and waved his hand. A streak of white light fiercely shot through the air and arrived above the python. It revolved once in a flourish and then easily sliced through the python's vulnerable neck. As a result, the python's headless body sprayed a fountain of blood 10 meters into the air before finally collapsing to the ground. The old man's expression relaxed after finishing off the python, and he muttered, "It's finally done. However, it is somewhat surprising. This 3-headed ebony snake wasn't as fearsome as the legends described." Marquis Nanlong shook his head and hesitantly said, "It's possible that this wasn't a true specimen. Don't forget, a true 3-headed ebony serpent is winged, and is said that each of the 3 heads also have different elemental abilities. This serpent can't have been genuine, or we wouldn't have been able to deal with it so easily. Perhaps this serpent is a variant of another breed. Either way, we shouldn't delve too deeply into its origins. Let us head into the passage," Han Li calmly said. He then pointed to his huge mountain, and it quickly shrunk, returning to his sleeve in a streak of black light, revealing the smashed corpse of the huge python underneath it. Marquis Nanlong waved his hand, and a streak of gold and green light flew back to him, revealing his golden sword and the dark green ring. The flying sword returned into his body, and the ring was worn back on his hand. Lu Weiying glanced at the ruined corpse several times before arriving at its side. He casually reached out to one of the python's head and summoned a thumb-sized green core into his hand. With a trace of joy on his face, he looked at the other 2 heads and withdrew a core from each of them. At that moment, Han Li, who had finished collecting his puppet beast fragments, and Marquis Nanlong had arrived. Lu Weiying handed each of them one of the cores without saying another word. Han Li accepted the item and took a glance at it before indifferently putting it away. Marquis Nanlong did the same. Soon after, Lu Weiying turned the huge python's body to ashes with a single fireball and said, "It would have been troublesome to slay this beast if we were alone, but with our powers combined, Slaying ancient beasts of this level shouldn't be much of a challenge. If the ancient flame toad is this easy to deal with, then this journey will be quite laid back. Marquis Nanlong sighed and wryly smiled. I hope it will be that way, but it is likely that the ancient flame toad will be somewhat more troublesome. After all, it caused even Master Kang Kun to flee. Although he was greatly weakened at the time, the beast is certain to be formidable. After some thought, Lu Weiying replied with a silent nod. By then, Han Li had already flown around and collected the concealment formation flags. When he returned, he said, "Let's go. We'll find out how formidable the ancient flame toad is soon enough." With that said, he took the lead moving forward. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying glanced at each other and closely followed after him. After all, they had to rely on Han Li's yin-yang ring to pass through the Great North Essence lights. With the huge python slayed, the path was now open. There was a 300-meter wide stone road, surrounded by a barrier of red light that was incapable of being seen through. The three cultivators flew 15 meters above the ground with a careful speed. When they traveled over 10 kilometers on the road, the scenery changed, and they came across a faint yellow wall. There was a pitch-black cave in the stone wall over 20 meters wide. "It's here. After we pass through it, we should find ourselves in the valley's depths. The cave passage is over 5 kilometers long and is covered in Great North Essence lights." Marquis Nanlong sighed and turned to Han Li, saying, "Fellow Taoist Han, we'll be needing to use your yin-yang ring." Lu Weiying rubbed his chin and curiously said, "Since we know there are Great North Essence lights in the cave, can't we find another way to pass through? Or is this the only way through?" Marquis Nanlong shook his head and said, "There is no other way in besides this one. Brother Lu, strike the rock with your magic treasure and you will soon realize why." "All right, I'll strike it." Unresigned, Lu Weiying flung his sleeve and released a white light from his hand, fiercely striking at the stone wall. At that moment, Han Li clearly saw a rather strange short saber traveling within the streak of white light. It appeared to be a rarely seen flying saber magic treasure. Under Han Li's attentive gaze, the flying saber chopped at the stone wall in a display of blinding white radiance. Then, with a slight change in expression, Lu Weiying waved his hand and recalled the flying saber. Han Li clearly saw that the flying saber strike had left a shallow inch-long mark, with faint grains of silver light floating around the area. "That is," Lu Weiying revealed a trace of surprise and hastily stepped forward to look at the saber mark. After carefully examining it, he muttered, "Tailstar silver. This cave is made out of tailstar silver ore." When they heard the words tailstar silver, Han Li's expression vastly changed and he also stepped forward. He extended his finger and softly stroked the slash mark, examining the dust on his finger. Han Li had naturally heard of tailstar silver, as it was a material that could enhance the durability of a magic treasure. Its effects were only inferior to materials as precious as refined crystal. It was no wonder that Lu Weiying's strike barely damaged it. Regardless of whether it be in the scattered star seas or the heavenly south continent, it was something that was nearly extinguished. Han Li stared at the saber mark and silently raised his hand. Over 10 small azure swords shot out of his sleeve and directly struck the stone wall. The other two were alarmed, but they immediately realized what Han Li was doing. With a series of clangs, over 10 several-inch-deep holes appeared in the wall, each hole producing silver light specks. Han Li momentarily revealed surprise and he said, "It truly is tailstar silver, and it is mixed into the rock. Moreover, it isn't evenly distributed, so it isn't man-made. There should be a vein of tailstar silver within." Seeing that Han Li's swords had struck deeper than Lu Weiying's saber, the other both had a change of expression, but Lu Weiying's eyes betrayed a trace of greed as he stared at the rock wall in silence. A fiery passion also appeared on Marquis Nanlong's face, but after some thought, he regained his calm. Marquis Nanlong calmly said, "Let's go, we'll search for the treasures in the valley depths first." Lu Weiying hesitated and wore an expression of reluctance. "Go. Tailstar silver is an incredibly valuable treasure. Wouldn't it be better to dig this out first?" Marquis Nanlong frowned and faced Lu Weiying, speaking with a deep tone. "Brother Lu, how can you be so foolish at a time like this? Did you not personally witness how hard tailstar silver is? It may be possible that there is an entire vein of it, but a fist-sized chunk of ore can only be refined into a minuscule amount of it. How much time and magic power would you have to waste before it is worth it? And while this item may be precious, don't forget that what we lack isn't wealth, but materials to increase our cultivation and lifespan. When we reach our end, these possessions will mean nothing." Lu Weiying paused for a moment before repeatedly nodding in realization. He saluted Marquis Nanlong with gratefulness and said, "Brother Nanlong, you are completely right. I was overcome with greed and lost sight of our main objective. Many thanks for reminding me." Afterwards, he paid the wall no more attention and walked into the cave, as if afraid of being lured by the Telstar silver. Marquis Nanlong's expression relaxed, and he called out to Han Li before following after Lu Weiying. Han Li was also reluctant to part with the Telstar silver ore, and he unconsciously walked with slowed steps. Even though he had the auric essence-infused flying swords and enough spirit milk to restore his magic power, cutting out enough Telstar silver ore still wouldn't be an easy task. And if he followed through, he would also provoke envy from the other party members. Concluding that pursuing the Telstar silver would be unwise, Han Li could only sigh and follow his two party members into the cave. At that moment, Han Li suddenly heard a voice from the back of his mind. Hee, there is so much Telstar silver. I've spent so many years looking for it, but I wasn't able to find any. Devilfall Valley deserves its reputation. The silver is able to be used in puppet refinement. With a bit of Telstar silver mixed into the puppet's body, common magic treasures wouldn't be able to harm them. You must take all of it. The monarch of soul divergence spoke with an excited tone. Han Li bluntly rebuked him. "Take all of it. Old eccentric, are you dreaming? This is Telstar silver ore, not a vein. How can I take it away? Chip at it and take it away piece by piece." Old man snorted and said, "Since I've mentioned it, there is a method, of course. Youngster Han, don't you have those gold-devouring beetles? I can teach you a method to control the gold-devouring beetles and have them drill through the rock and consume the Telstar silver. They will then spit it out as crystallized silver. This method was something that I had acquired from an insect cultivator I killed. This applies to all spirit insects, but it is particularly suitable for your gold-devouring beetles." "All right, then how about you teach it to me? I'll immediately have the gold-devouring beetles search for the Telstar silver." Han Li immediately replied with delight, perhaps not only for Telstar silver, but also the mighty incantation. "First, let me tell you that regardless of how much Telstar silver you acquire, you will have to set aside enough for the final puppet I will refine. Also, you cannot waste it for other uses, particularly for mixing it with your magic treasure. If there is still Telstar silver after I refine the puppet body, you can use the rest as you wish." Han Li couldn't help but smile and said, "Senior might not know this, but my magic treasures have already been tempered with refined crystal. It is quite a bit more effective than Telstar silver." The monarch of soul divergence paused before yelling in alarm, "Refined crystal, you had such a heaven-defying material. Do you still have any left over? It will be greatly useful to me even if you only have a little bit left." There seemed to be a trace of delight in his voice. Han Li bluntly replied, "You should know that I use a set of flying swords. While I had acquired a large chunk of refined crystal, it was barely enough to temper my flying swords. There is nothing left over." "There is nothing left. What a waste!" The old man's tone was filled with sorrow and disappointment. When Han Li heard this, he couldn't help but inwardly roll his eyes. Using the refined crystal on his own magic treasure couldn't be considered a waste, but since he was asking for a favor, he pretended not to hear this. At that moment, Han Li had followed the two into the cave, but had managed to keep a distance away from them, intentionally or otherwise, to prevent them from discovering anything strange. The cave was dark, but this was easily solved for cultivators by pouring spiritual power into their eyes. Due to this, they were able to see clearly without any problems. The cave's width and height were exactly the same as the entrance, and the colors of the stone were a consistent yellow. Along the way, Han Li casually used one of his swords to cut the stone wall. As a result, it revealed specks of silver light, much to Han Li's astonishment. As Han Li walked forward, he learned the insect control technique from the monarch of soul divergence. Although the incantation for the technique was cryptic due to being formed from ancient characters, Han Li was able to learn it with a bit of explanation from the old eccentric. With a sudden understanding, Han Li was able to smoothly employ the technique. With the technique imparted, the old man grew silent once more. Han Li contemplated the incantation a moment more, and verified that it was correct before casually brushing his sleeve across his waist and removing a spirit beast pouch. A short moment later, gold-devouring beetles began to silently fly from his sleeve and across the passageway. With his other party members over 30 meters ahead of him, they were unable to sense Han Li's actions. In the time it took to finish a cup of tea, the gold-devouring beetles had completely left him. Han Li then withdrew the sleeve and formed an incantation gesture. Following that, he uttered an incantation in his mind, and spread it with his spiritual sense to the cave entrance, where a large swarm of gold-devouring beetles was gathered. The gold-devouring beetles suddenly shined with golden light, and the flying insects soon grew vague as they tunneled into the stone walls without the slightest resistance. They were no longer in sight, and the rock's surface wasn't damaged in the slightest. Sensing this with his spiritual sense, Han Li recalled it with relief and began to quicken his steps. After walking for a time more, they arrived at the start of a winding road. The other two had stopped walking, much to Han Li's shock. He hastily looked forward and saw that the passageway had doubled in width. The spacious path was covered with stalagmites and stalactites that faintly released lines of silver light, illuminating the cave. The silver lines were exceptionally strange. Although they were incorporeal, they each appeared to nearly contain their own form. Marquis Nanlong stared at the lines of silver ahead of him and deeply sighed. These must be the Great North Essence lights. Although you two fellow Taoists might know something of it, I must warn you to not rashly use any spiritual power or treasures apart from the yin-yang ring when inside. If the Great North Essence lights sense any spiritual power leak, we will certainly die. Han Li grew silent, and he didn't reply. He simply waved his sleeve and summoned a jet-black ring that circled once in the air before dropping into his hand, revealing a flicker of light. When Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying saw Han Li taking out the yin-yang ring, they immediately blurred and appeared close behind him wearing solemn expressions. It appeared they wanted Han Li to take the lead. Han Li held the ring in his hand and blew a mist of azure essence qi onto it. In a flicker of black light, the azure qi was cleanly absorbed by the ring. Afterwards, it flew above Han Li's head and remained still as it floated above him. Han Li raised his hand and struck the ring with a spell seal. The yin-yang ring trembled, and it began to fluctuate in size before growing to about 20 meters wide. Go, Han Li pointed at the ring and uttered the command. Releasing a strange hum, the huge ring began to spring forward. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying gazed at the following scene with a solemn expression. As the huge ring came across the countless lines of light floating in the air, an inconceivable scene occurred. The lines of light rippled like disturbed water. In the instant that the huge ring tread across the lights, it flickered with black light and caused the lines of light to distort around it, creating a passageway through them. When the party saw this, they all smiled with relief. However, Han Li was still curious about the might of the Great North Essence lights. After some thought, he slapped his storage pouch and took out a blue fist-sized pearl, a top-grade defensive magic tool that he had acquired in the past. Holding it in his hand, Han Li poured a bit of spiritual power into it, causing a blue light barrier to surge around it. With a flip of his hand, the pearl shot forward. As soon as the pearl of blue light entered the Great North Essence lights, the silver lines flocked towards it as if they had seen prey. These fine lines penetrated through the blue light pearl from every angle as if nothing were there. A short moment later, the silver lines sparked and the pearl combusted, leaving behind a beautiful sparkle that eventually faded away to reveal the silver lines that remained. Han Li narrowed his eyes, and his fellow party members turned sullen at the sight. Han Li's expression remained normal and he waved his hand. The huge ring flew back above them and silently dropped down, covering them on all sides. Afterwards, a barrier of black light emerged from the ring and enveloped the three cultivators. Let's go. With that said, Han Li walked forward and began to move the yin-yang ring. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying didn't dare to delay the slightest bit while inside the barrier and closely followed after Han Li. Although the ring did offer protection against the Great North Essence lights, they didn't dare to raise any additional defenses and risk provoking them. As for Han Li, he maintained a calm appearance, but he still felt somewhat worried. Once the huge ring entered the Great North Essence lights, the lights parted away as expected, and they made way for the black light barrier. Han Li felt relief at the sight of this and turned around to see that his party members had also relaxed. Han Li smiled and slowly moved forward with the yin-yang ring. In an area of Devil Fall Valley covered in snow and ice, there was a group of black-clothed ghost spirit sect cultivators that were using their various magic treasures to fight against a giant lizard. Floating close by was the old man with a pale complexion surnamed Zhang. He was floating in the air as he watched the core formation cultivators fighting in a frenzy. Seeing that the Seven Sect disciples weren't able to dispatch the ancient beast after some time, he frowned and personally took action. Elder Zhang formed an incantation gesture with his hands, and countless strands of pitch-black qi emerged from his body. They then condensed together to form a jet-black flood dragon that charged at the lizard with overbearing force. Soon after, a huge net of dark green light glowed from behind it and enveloped both of the flood dragon and the lizard. Countless green fist-sized fireballs then condensed from the net and rained down upon the lizard beast with a thunderous explosion. Black light intertwined with green flames illuminated the area and then faded away a moment later to reveal a charred lizard corpse. Elder Zhang swept his sleeve and blew the ancient beast over 30 meters away in a gale, revealing a crack in the ice beneath it. The crack led downward, revealing a passage underneath it that shined with a faint white light. "Go," Elder Zhang gloomily commanded. Then he shot into the passage in a black blur, and the other ghost spirit sect cultivators followed after him without hesitation. Wang Chan and Yan Ruyan were amongst the group of disciples, but Wang Tiangu and the ghost spirit sect master were nowhere to be seen. Soon, the ghost spirit sect cultivators all entered the crack in the ice, and the scene above ground became calm once more. However, snow continued to fall down, and a sheet of ice froze over the ancient beast's body, turning it into an unremarkable snow mound. In the forest the ghost spirit sect had first visited, Violet Spirit looked at what appeared to be a small familiar mound. After spending the time it took to finish a cup of tea lost in thought, she raised her head to look for any huge trees around her. Then, she lowered her head to look at the earth mound below her before shooting a streak of white light at the mound with a flick of her finger. With a muffled ping, a 3-meter-wide hole appeared in the earth in front of her. Gray ash scattered from the hole, revealing a damp hole with scorched tree roots. With a smile on her face, Violet Spirit muttered, "This should be it. The ghost spirit sect was able to find it much quicker than I did. However, they didn't expect that someone would be looking for their tracks. They left in such a hurry that they left a trail behind." With a wave of her sleeve, the earth pit was reburied and she took out an azure talisman. After that, she walked once around the large trees nearby and stuck it onto one of them. Then, in a flicker of azure light, the talisman sank into the tree and disappeared without a trace. Finished with the talisman, she flew off after confirming her direction. In a huge canyon, an old Taoist was looking down at the various-colored restriction in front of him and muttered to himself. There were 2 puppets with fiendish appearances standing motionlessly behind him. At the other edge of the canyon, there was a mass of crimson light that continuously wavered. It was one of the passageways into the valley depths. The path was short, but it was filled with several formidable ancient restrictions. Although the old Taoist was skilled with spell formations, it was likely he wouldn't be able to dissolve the restrictions in a short amount of time. Perhaps lacking the time to find another entrance, or due to an immediate need to enter the valley depths, he began to test the restrictions but remained hesitant. "What? Does Taoist Heaven Crystal feel that he can't take on the restrictions alone? How about I help?" Suddenly, the old Taoist heard a gloomy voice speak from behind him. The old man was Taoist Heaven Crystal, who had exchanged the soul stones with Han Li at Soaring Heaven City. As for the 2 fiendish puppets standing behind him, they were 2 of the ancient puppets that he had repaired, each possessing the power of an early nascent soul cultivator. When he had tested their power, it took great effort for him to subdue one of them. With these servants under him, he had gathered the courage to enter Devilfall Valley in search of treasure. At that moment, Taoist Heaven Crystal quickly turned around, startled from hearing a voice speak from behind. About 200 meters behind him, there were several green-robed cultivators silently floating in the air. The one who spoke was the leading green-robed man that had a gloomy expression and long facial hair. When Taoist Heaven Crystal examined them, he felt his heart drop. These men were all nascent soul cultivators. Difficulty suppressing the amazement in his heart, he wryly smiled and said, "So it was the controlling spirit sect's fellow Taoist Dongmen. I do not recognize these other fellow Taoists. Are they also elders from your sect?" The controlling spirit sect master Dongmen Tu glanced at the 2 fiendish puppets and said, "You should consider them as such for the time being. Moreover, those 2 puppets behind you seem exceptional. Their power can't be underestimated." Taoist Heaven Crystal cautiously said, "Fellow Taoist Dongmen must be joking. How can these meager puppets draw your attention? Nevertheless, how do you plan on comparing with me?" Dongmen Tu stared at the old Taoist and said, "Although I've resided in the controlling spirit sect for long, I didn't make much outside contact. Despite this, I've heard of your reputation as a spell formation master. As lacking as I may be, I've also studied something of spell formations. Alone, it would take us too long to break through the restrictions, but together, the odds will be far greater." When Taoist Heaven Crystal heard him, he frowned in thought and still appeared hesitant. Dongmen Tu's expression turned gloomy, but he remained patient as he said, "What? Does fellow Taoist Heaven Crystal believe that I will be a liability? How about this? Let's have our cooperation be limited to dissolving the restrictions. After that, we'll go our separate ways and I won't make things difficult for you without reason. And don't forget that even if you can break the restrictions alone, it will take up too much of your time. The valley depths are where one is most likely to find treasures, but I fear they will be swept away by the others by the time you get inside. According to my knowledge, this path to enter the valley depths has been well studied by other spell formation masters. When Taoist Heaven Crystal heard this, his heart stirred and he raised his head to look at the other 5 green-robed cultivators standing behind him. He eventually nodded and said, "Since you made the offer, I will accept. We will work together to break the restrictions, but after we enter the valley depths, we will go about our own business." Dongmen Tu immediately smiled and quickly said, "Hee, that will do. Fellow Taoist Heaven Crystal, please rest assured. Given the power of your 2 puppets, how could I force you to do anything? After we enter the depths, we'll rely on luck in our search for treasures." After glancing at everything in front of him, Han Li couldn't help but wear a peculiar expression and mutter, "This is the valley depths." At the bottom of a steep 3-kilometer-tall cliff, there was a small cave that he just emerged from not long ago. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying stood side by side as they glanced at the scene before them, both of them wearing odd expressions. There a huge mountain range before them with countless mountains of varying sizes. It reached out as far as the eye could see. Additionally, the world that surrounded them had areas glowing with rainbow light, be it sky or earth. The areas of rainbow light varied in size, with some reaching several kilometers in size, covering the sky, while the small ones were only about a meter large and shined with weaker radiance, but all of them were extremely beautiful. What caused Han Li and the others to be astonished was not the clouds of light, but the chaotic nature of the spiritual sense around them. Regardless of the attribute of spiritual qi, they all mingled together and gave people of a feeling of immense unease, as if the very world would lash out at them with a single wrong move. Marquis Nanlong sighed after recollecting his thoughts and said, "This place is certainly where the ancient cultivators fought. The worldly spiritual qi is thoroughly destroyed here. As a result, it will have an influence on any of our techniques." Han Li wryly smiled and pointed to the sky. "That is only a secondary concern. That is what is going to be most troublesome." About a kilometer above them in the sky, there was a group of over 10-foot-long arcs of white light floating there. It greatly startled Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying when they clearly saw what it was. Lu Weiying shouted in astonishment, "How can there be so many spatial tiers, and how can they wander?" Marquis Nanlong's expression also grew unsightly. After noticing Marquis Nanlong's change in expression, Han Li chuckled and said, "This should be expected. Since this was the battlegrounds of ancient cultivators, there should be more spatial tiers here than the outside. Why else would so many nascent soul cultivators enter only to never return? We can only rely on Master Kang Kun's map on the path forward, or else." Brother Han does make sense. We definitely can't take any risks and tread off the path, else there may be some invisible spatial tiers there. However, there was still much to fear from the wandering spatial tiers, but so long as they paid attention to them, they shouldn't pose much danger. After saying this, the Marquis regained his calm. Lu Weiying tensely frowned as he stared at another filled with spatial tiers. He pensively mentioned, "However, the number of these spatial tiers is over 10 times greater than that on the outside. Those words only apply if the invisible spatial tiers don't wander as well. If the invisible spatial tiers roam and scatter like the visible ones, then Master Kang Kun's map might not also be very safe." When Han Li heard this, he was stunned and he turned his head. Blue light brightly shined from his eyes as he glanced at an area over 300 meters away, discovering a vague arc of light motionlessly floating there. He calmed down after looking at it for a while. But then, just as he pondered about whether or not he should leak this information to the other two, Marquis Nanlong hesitantly spoke, as if misunderstanding Han Li's pondering for worry. "There is no need for you fellow Taoists to be worried. The invisible spatial tiers don't move. Master Kang Kun has mentioned this in his records." Lu Weiying's spirit stirred and he suspiciously asked, "Is Brother Nanlong certain? How did Master Kang Kun learn about it?" Marquis Nanlong looked at the two and calmly said, "Brother Lu should realize that in the past, Master Kang Kun had suffered from grave injuries. It should come as a question as to how he was able to safely leave Devil Fall Valley. By relying on a technique that he had cultivated, he was able to sense the locations of spatial tiers before leaving the valley. How else could he have left the valley with such grave injuries?" Having heard this, the old man felt a wave of relief. There are such techniques in this world. In that case, it wasn't due to luck that Master Kang Kun was able to escape from Devil Fall Valley. Han Li's expression stirred as well, and he sighed with relief. Marquis Nanlong's worries faded away upon seeing this. He feared that his two party members would be intent on retreating. He was particularly worried about Han Li, who he found immensely difficult to read. Since Han Li would be the main force in the fight against the ancient flame toad, he needed to convince him to move forward. With a stern expression, the Marquis then said, "Let's go. According to what the record said, we cannot fly too quickly, and it will take about a day of travel until we arrive at the ancient flame toad's nest. Be careful on the way there." Han Li faintly smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Nanlong should be worried about taking care of himself. Fellow Taoist Lu and I will look after ourselves with care." Old man Lu nodded in agreement. Satisfied, Marquis Nanlong said, "Then let us set off. We've wasted enough time as it is." He then recognized his bearings and wrapped himself in a ball of light before slowly flying off. Han Li and the old man glanced at each other and also took to the air. They closely followed after Marquis Nanlong without taking even a step off track. If they flew even a few meters off course, it was possible they could wander into a spatial tier of an ancient restriction. As such, the party was undoubtedly careful. The path taken along the way was incredibly strange. There were times it would go straight and others where it would move in an entire circle. But regardless, they would stop every 2 hours and make sure of their location before continuing forward. Additionally, Marquis Nanlong didn't look at any jade slips on the way. It was clear he had already memorized the path. Han Li maintained a neutral appearance, but on the way, he was memorizing every step of the path back. As such, if there were any unexpected development, he would have a path to flee for his life. He reckoned that Lu Weiying was most likely doing the same. After all, cultivators who mastered the basic elemental cultivation arts gained perfect memory. Remembering some directions was an effortless task. Their flight continued for almost an entire day, and they hadn't encountered any danger. Han Li felt at ease, believing that the Marquis had acquired the genuine route that Master Kang Kun had used when traveling through Yellow Maple Valley. As Han Li continued memorizing the path while following Marquis Nanlong, he diligently scanned his surroundings with his spiritual sense. He reckoned that he encountered at least 4 areas that were guarded with formidable restrictions along the path. There were also a few areas that seemed amiss. He wasn't able to determine whether they were spell formations of abnormalities produced from spiritual chi fluctuation. Han Li was quite curious about these areas as he knew that they were likely to contain treasures left behind from ancient cultivators. Although Han Li felt eager excitement to explore these areas, he restrained himself. Although Han Li possessed some understanding of certain ancient cultivator restrictions, he also knew full well ancient were incredibly formidable. Only spatial tiers posed a greater danger than they did. Even with his bright-sight spirit eyes being able to see through, there was still a significant chance of him provoking a profound spell formation. Currently, common ancient treasures no longer tempted him. Having entered the valley, so long as he acquired the core of the ancient flame toad, the remnant treasures of the ancient cultivator, the spirit kindle fruit, and the tailstar silver, it can be considered that he had reaped massive gains. With the benefits and drawbacks considered, Han Li abandoned any intention of doing anything dangerous. Then, his gaze was drawn over to Lu Weiying. The old man wore a sullen expression, and he occasionally glanced into the distance. Han Li inwardly sighed. It seemed that if the old man couldn't acquire the items he wanted from the ancient cultivator remains, he would most likely have to search the valley depths. It wasn't a matter of greed, but rather desperation. Han Li knew that if his lifespan also reached his end, he would also take the risk. After all, if he succeeded, his life would be prolonged and his cultivation art would advance. As Han Li considered this, he couldn't help but a trace of sorrow. At that moment, Marquis Nanlong ceased flying and looked to the area in front of him, his expression wavering. Han Li frowned at the sight of this and faintly felt a sense of dread. He glanced around him, and he immediately stared at Marquis Nanlong's back in silence. Below them was a small mountain that was over 300 meters tall. It was entirely unremarkable. Ahead of them was an extremely tall mountain range. It was clearly said that it would take a day's travel to reach the nest of the ancient flame toad, but they hadn't flown long enough, so it was clear this wasn't their objective. Lu Weiying was puzzled by this sudden stop. Appearing surprised, he puzzlingly asked, "Brother Nanlong, what happened? Why aren't we moving forward?" When Marquis Nanlong heard this, he slowly turned around to look at his other 2 party members. He bitterly smiled and said, "It seems we've encountered a problem. We might need to brave a bit of danger." The old man's expression blanked and he bewilderedly said, "Brother Nanlong, what do you mean?" Han Li stroked his nose, but he remained silent. However, he also wore a curious expression. "Fellow Taoists, do you see the two mountains in the distance?" Marquis Nanlong pointed to two mountains that highly remembered one another. "Of course, does this problem have something to do with them?" Lu Weiying astonishedly asked. "Precisely," Marquis Nanlong spoke with complete certainty. Lu Weiying noticed nothing out of the ordinary about the two mountains and bafflingly asked, "Is there something wrong with these two mountains?" "From now on, we're setting off to one of those two mountains. The point where they join together will be the ancient flame toad's nest. However, there is a group of soaring purple-lined scorpions that dwell on the left side of the mountain range. Although they only number in the tens, each one of them is ferocious. I fear that we will most likely alarm them. It will be quite troublesome." Lu Weiying shouted in alarm. Soaring purple-lined scorpions. Those fearsome insects that eliminated all the cultivators of the Ocean Mist sect in the state of Wangshui. When Han Li heard the name soaring purple-lined scorpions, he felt a wave of shock. Marquis Nanlong sighed and said, "That's right, it's those vicious insects. Additionally, this lot is much more fearsome than the swarm that emerged in the state of Wangshui. They've lived for tens of thousands of years, and their bodies are entirely black-purple." Lu Weiying lost his composure and glared at Marquis Nanlong. He bluntly said, "Fellow Taoist Nanlong, don't tell me you're joking. How could we afford to provoke purple-lined scorpions? If there were only 2 of 3 of them, we could deal with them if we were careful, but there are over 10 of them. Wouldn't we be sending ourselves to our deaths if we approach them?" The Marquis wore a helpless expression and explained, "There is one other path, but it is even more dangerous. The other path is filled with a large number of invisible spatial tiers. It isn't something that we can tread through. Since we can't identify the location of the invisible tiers, the purple-lined scorpions is definitely the safer option." Lu Weiying remained dumbfounded for a long while. Needless to say, purple-lined scorpions were preferable to spatial tiers, particularly invisible ones. When Han Li heard of the invisible spatial tiers, he looked into the distance, and his gaze began to wander. Han Li finally broke his silence and spoke with a wry tone. It seemed the master Kang Kun had taken the path with the spatial tiers. He should have been able to avoid them with his abilities. When Marquis Nanlong heard this, he bitterly smiled and said, "Brother Han is right. Without Master Kang Kun's abilities, we have no way to safely avoid the spatial tiers. In comparison, a battle with the purple-lined scorpions is far less dangerous." Lu Weiying strongly shook his head and said, "That won't do. We definitely cannot fight the purple-lined scorpions. You only heard of what had happened in the state of Wangshui, but I personally took part in the purple-lined scorpions' extermination as a representative of the Heaven Peak sect. They are fearsome beyond your imagination. Provoking all of them at once is a death sentence." The old man's fear towards the scorpions was beyond what Marquis Nanlong had anticipated. He originally believed that they would have prevailed over the scorpions despite a bit of challenge. Now, he wore an expression of hesitation. At that moment, Han Li frowned and began to recall the information of the purple-lined scorpions from the exotic insect rankings. Soaring purple-lined scorpions were ranked 14 on the rankings of exotic insects, close to the ranking of gold-devouring beetles. If it weren't for the small number of eggs that the scorpions laid and their limited numbers, their ranking would likely be above the gold-devouring beetles. Although they didn't have the same ability to devour everything like the gold-devouring beetles, their defenses were about the same and couldn't be harmed by ordinary magic treasures. Additionally, their speed was amazingly fast and they were incredibly venomous, earning them their high position on the exotic insect rankings. Not to mention that these purple-lined scorpions had resided in Devil Fall Valley for countless years. They had already reached the peak form of maturation, where their bodies turned black-purple. However, it appeared Marquis Nanlong only knew a smidgen on how fearsome these insects were. Contrarily, the old man had witnessed their power before and paled at the mention of them. As Marquis Nanlong's expression turned gloomy, Han Li coldly chuckled. Marquis Nanlong had only mentioned the purple-lined scorpions after they've arrived this far. It seemed it wasn't done out of any good intentions, but to keep them from fleeing. Since they had arrived so far, they would both feel reluctant at returning without having made any gains and feel obliged to face the danger. Han Li continued weighing his options as he considered the danger of dealing with the purple-lined scorpions and what there was to gain. After all, he would have to reveal his abilities to see through spatial tiers in order to take the other path. As it was his most crucial ability for guiding him through the valley, he wouldn't tell it to others unless it was absolutely necessary. While Han Li pondered with a lowered head, Lu Weiying stood in place with a gloomy expression, fear betrayed from his eyes. Marquis Nanlong also glanced at the mountains with the purple-lined scorpions with a wavering expression. For a time, the three stood in place, without knowing whether to advance or retreat. After a long spell of silence, Han Li's expression stirred, and he lifted his head to reveal a slight smile. Although Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying appeared absent-minded, they were closely paying attention to the actions of their companions and noticed Han Li's movements. Marquis Nanlong immediately turned his head to look at Han Li and he asked, "What? Could it be that Brother Han has a good idea?" A trace of hope could be heard from his tone. Lu Weiying also turned to look at Han Li with excitement. However, Han Li didn't immediately reply. Instead, he grasped Hai's storage pouch, taking out a small green bottle. He asked, "Have you two fellow Taoists heard of the 10 supreme poisons?" Lu Weiying said with a start, "The 10 supreme poisons. I've heard of it before. I heard that they possessed an inconceivably venomous. Even if cultivators like us were to make contact with the poison, we could come to an immediate end. I have heard that Wei Wuya mainly cultivated venomous techniques, allowing him to utilize one of the 10 supreme poisons, corpse venom. When other cultivators fight him, they dare not to grow too close to him or they would risk perishing without warning." Marquis Nanlong looked at the small bottle in Han Li's hand and quickly said, "However, I heard that a few of the 10 supreme poisons had other miraculous uses apart from their deadly applications. Could it be that fellow Taoist Han has one of these poisons?" Han Li raised the small bottle and explained, "It seems there is no need for me to say anything. You've already guessed it. This bottle contains one of the 10 supreme poisons, Jade dove. It is said that this poison is refined from the saliva of a demon bird with a jade beak." Brother Han means to say. A trace of happiness appeared on Lu Weiying's face. Han Li promptly answered, "The purple-lined scorpions may be durable, but so long as we use the poison to draw them away from the mountains, it will give us the opportunity to cross it." "How can we draw them away with the poison?" "Oh he. I forgot that fellow Taoist was skilled in puppet techniques. Smearing a few puppets with the poison will be enough to attract the scorpions." At that moment, Marquis Nanlong wore a smile. Once that was said, Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he mused. "Marquis Nanlong speaks of the matter quite easily and has pushed the matter completely onto me with only a few words. Rather, his eternal flight orioles would do just as well. Last time, several of my puppets were destroyed in the fight against the huge python." Although Han Li felt somewhat dissatisfied, he calmly nodded. Because this was but a small matter, he wasn't going to have a falling out over it. After all, they were still only halfway to their objective, and the poison was originally one of the treasures left behind by Master Kang Kun after all. With Han Li's medicinal experience, Han Li was to recognize the poison with a single smell, and he immediately put it away. Now that he thought about it, it was quite possible that Master Kang Kun had left behind the poison in preparation to deal with purple-lined scorpions. However, it seemed excessively affectionate and out of character for Master Kang Kun to think of scheme every step for his descendants to acquire treasure. Having recalled Master Kang Kun's ruins, he recalled the portrait of the three-headed six-armed demon beast, feeling that there was something mysterious about it. Since Marquis Nanlong has previously said that he was a descendant of Master Kang Kun, he should know something of it. But regardless of whatever there is that is amiss, Han Li was only cared with acquiring the core of the ancient flame toad. He wouldn't involve himself in matters that didn't concern him and risk attracting problems to himself. As Han Li came to this conclusion, his hands continued to move. With a casual slap of his storage pouch, he summoned 5 streaks of light from his storage pouch, revealing themselves to be huge ape puppets. Han Li promptly took out several small jade bottles and poured in a drop of the jade dove poison into each of them before properly sealing the bottles. He then gave them to the ape puppets for them to tightly grasp. Then, under the guidance of Marquis Nanlong, Han Li ordered his huge ape puppets to silently make their way to the left mountaintop. After they made it part of the way, Han Li turned to his party and said, "Let us set out too. We can't be too far away from the puppets. When the puppets attract the scorpions, we'll have to move as quickly as possible across the mountain or we may miss our chance." The Marquis and the old man raised no objections, and they closely followed after the 8 puppets alongside him. Soon, the 8 puppets arrived at the mountain peak. Han Li and the others were a couple kilometers away in concealment. At that moment, the 8 puppets used the entirety of their strength to crush the small bottles in their hands. Suddenly, a putrid smell immediately spread through the mountain, and the 8 puppets flew off to one side of the mountain. Although Han Li's plan seemed reasonable, it wasn't guaranteed that the poison would have any effect. As a matter of fact, Han Li wasn't completely certain of the poison itself. After all, everything he knew of the 10 supreme poisons was from records. He hadn't personally experienced them. A moment later, any doubts the 3 cultivators possessed were completely banished. When the huge 8 puppets had flown 100 meters, the previously still mountain was filled with bewildered screams. As soon as Han Li heard them, he suddenly felt the chi and blood in his body roil while his mind did cloud over. He nearly fell from the sky. In his alarm, he hastily circulated the entirety of the spiritual chi in his body and stopped himself from falling. He then turned his head to look at his party members with his bright-side eyes. They weren't in any better shape, and their bodies also shook several times before they managed to recover. Han Li frowned, overwhelmed with shock. That strange scream attack hadn't targeted his spiritual sense but the chi that the body possessed. Despite how powerful his spiritual sense was, it had no method of blocking this scream attack. It came as a surprise to him that the purple-lined scorpions possessed this innate ability. It was clear to see that the records didn't describe everything. As Han Li was mulling over what had happened, he saw 10 or so purple-black streaks shoot out from the mountain and chase after the huge 8 puppets in a blur. In that moment, Han Li hastily ordered the puppets to fly at their greatest speed and tear through the sky in streaks of white light. Although it was only for an instant, Han Li was able to roughly see the purple-black streaks. In addition to their astonishing 3-meter-long bodies, they had a pair of transparent wings and a purple-black carapace that shined with light. Aside from their size and wings, they appeared completely the same as an ordinary scorpion. The scorpion at the very front of the swarm was twice as large as the others, appearing to be their leader. With the dreadful appearance of yellow mist trailing from its mouth, Han Li couldn't help but stare at it. The huge apes were clearly slower than the purple insects, but they had a head start. They drew the purple-lined scorpions away for the time being and soon became black dots in the distance. Soon Han Li loudly shouted, "Go! Some of the puppets have already been caught in restrictions. They will be overtaken soon." As soon as that was said, Han Li ceased concealing himself and shot forward, streaking through the air. His other 2 party members immediately set out after him, making their way to the mountaintop. All 3 knew that if they didn't rush past the mountain in this instant, it would be extremely troublesome given the speed of the purple-lined scorpions. Fortunately, they all moved quickly. Even without using the thunderstorm wings, Han Li was able to fly towards the mountain in the blink of an eye with his deeper cultivation. At that moment, he felt the connections to his 8 puppets disappear one by one. Dread filling his heart, Han Li sped past the scorpion's nest. When the cultivators made it to the other side of the mountain, they felt a wave of relief. Marquis Nanlong smiled and said, "Fortunately, thanks to Brother Han's Jade of poison and his puppets, we were able to make it past that trial. It would have been quite a hassle otherwise." Han Li looked at Marquis Nanlong and calmly said, "It was nothing. It was only a matter of chance." Han Li skirted over the matter, knowing that the Jade of poison was originally something that Master Kang Kun had left behind. Lu Weiying also complimented Han Li for easily resolving the matter. Han Li smiled and muttered a few words in response before heading on their way. After continuing on for half a day without anything else happening, the temperature in the air began to rise. The mountain ridge also became verdant as they continued forward, a stark contrast to the barren land that had surrounded them before. Eventually, they arrived at a point where even the mountain rocks had become a fire-red color. A few of the nearby mountains even had cracks glowing with lava scattered across them that released burning air and gray ash like a prison of scorching earth. Han Li and Lu Weiying revealed surprise upon seeing this, but Marquis Nanlong remained calm as he knew that they hadn't deviated from the path. Not long after, the 3 arrived at a huge red mountain that was over 10 kilometers tall. Most of the mountain was covered in glowing red clouds and was surrounded by much smaller mountains, making it appear far more prominent. When Marquis Nanlong saw the mountain, he stopped flying and the light surrounding him vanished. Han Li and the old man glanced at each other with excitement, knowing that they had arrived. Marquis Nanlong let out a long sigh and he turned around, saying, "Fellow Taoists, there is a cave below the mountain, which is the nest of the ancient flame toad and where the ancient cultivator remains reside. It is said that the creature is powerful. Let's talk about how we should deal with it." Below the mountain, Han Li raised his brow when he heard this, and he soon spread out his spiritual sense. As expected, There was a huge fire-red cave inside the mountain that occasionally released waves of burning winds. Fearing that any further prying would alert the flame toad within, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense. Lu Weiying quickly said, "What is there to discuss? Fellow Taoist Han will take charge with his ice attribute techniques, and we will provide support in slaying the flame toad." "Brother Lu, this matter isn't so simple. According to Kang Kun's records, the ancient flame toad's nest is half submerged in lava. The beast will be able to flee into the lava when it is injured and quickly recover. Additionally, we will not have the advantage in that environment. Our best plan of action would be to place down a spell formation and draw the toad out of its nest. I have prepared an ice attribute spell formation precisely for this reason." Lu Weiying raised no objections after hearing the Marquis, and Han Li didn't find anything amiss about it either. With their plan of attack decided, they began to make preparations. In addition to Marquis Nanlong's formation, Han Li also placed down his own spell formations to deal with any unexpected occurrences. With that done, the cultivators concealed themselves as they waited for Han Li to lure the flame toad out of its cave. Han Li slapped his storage pouch and took out his remaining white wolf puppet. He then sat down near the edge of the spell formation and sent the puppet into the mountain cave. Controlling the puppet with a trace of his spiritual sense, Han Li was able to clearly see the entirety of the cave's interior. There was a natural-made tunnel that was about 30 meters long ahead of the wolf puppet. The stone walls were black and red, and there were occasional threads of flame that leaked through cracks, causing the nearby air to be warped by heat. Han Li was convinced that if weaker cultivators were to enter the passage, they wouldn't be able to defend against the heat and would shortly lose consciousness. Since the white wolf was a mechanical puppet, the problem didn't apply to it. Not long after, it arrived in an underground world of red. The area was a kilometer wide, but a majority of it was submerged in boiling lava. The sound of it splattering inspired a fear of being boiled alive. Surrounding the lake was glowing scarlet ground that was covered in sparse greenery. The plants came as a surprise, but it was clear to see that it was a rare type of spirit grass. However, the white wolf puppet showed no interest in the spirit grass and focused on a protrusion in the lava. The monster was currently lying on its back and was loudly breathing in its sleep. Its body was 10 meters wide, nearly 20 meters long. With the addition of its glowing fire-red body, it possessed an unordinary aura. Occasionally, when the beast breathed, it would release a cloud of red mist around itself. This must be the ancient flame toad. Han Li was able to clearly see the beast and carefully examined it for a long while. Afterwards, he turned his attention towards the stone platform jutting from the lava lake. The stone platform appeared ancient. Although the platform's surroundings were caved with many decorative designs and talisman characters, its four corners were already worn down. At the center of the platform were the remains of a green-robed cultivator, haphazardly lying down. The robes were simple but had a strange style. At a glance, one could tell they weren't clothes from a modern cultivator. Additionally, despite the years that had passed, the gown still appeared new as it glowed with a faint green light. The remains inside the robes had long rotted away, only revealing translucent bones as clear as crystal. Having closely examined the remains, Han Li glanced at the ancient flame toad before withdrawing his strand of spiritual sense from the puppet and having the spiritual sense sneak towards the remains. He decided to first take a look at whether or not the body possessed any treasures. At first glance, he wasn't able to discover the existence or any treasures or a storage pouch on the body, much to his worry. However, it was possible the treasures were hidden near the stone platform or were perhaps hidden inside the green robes. The strand of spiritual sense arrived above the remains, but when it sank down to them, a change occurred. The green robes brightly shone and created a barrier of green light around it, repelling the strand of spiritual sense and causing a wave of odd spiritual chi fluctuations nearby. The sleeping ancient flame toad seemed to detect this and quickly opened its eyes, glancing around to find the white wolf puppet at the cave's entrance. "Not good," Han Li shouted in his mind. The strand of spiritual sense immediately returned to the wolf puppet, and the puppet hastily turned around and fled in a streak of white light. At that same time, the round flame toad flipped over and leaped into the air before landing on a huge rock in a crouch position. It glanced at the white wolf's afterimage and furiously croaked. Soon after, it pounced off the rock and chased after the puppet while enveloped in a red mist. The ancient flame toad is on its way. Be on guard. Hidden near the spell formation, Han Li's lips moved as he sent a voice transmission to his two party members. Their faces froze as they glanced at the mountain from a distance. A white streak shot out from within and directly flew towards the party of cultivators. A moment later, a ball wrapped in red mist flew out from the cave, closely chasing after it. Its speed was just as fast as an early nascent soul cultivator. Han Li's expression stirred at the sight of this. Fortunately, the white wolf puppet was specialized in speed, otherwise it might not have been able to lure it out. With that thought, Han Li willed the wolf puppet to rush at full power without regard to the puppet's integrity. Afterwards, he flipped his hand to summon a ball of blue flame into his palm. When the other two cultivators saw this, they prepared their magic treasures with serious expression as they quietly waited next to the spell formation. While the distance between the cultivators and the huge mountain appeared great, the white streak and the ball of fire-red mist crossed the distance in the blink of an eye. A stern expression then appeared on Han Li's face as the blue flame in his palm roiled, growing larger. But when the white streak arrived near the spell formation and was just about to rush inside, the flame toad seemed to grow impatient. It loudly croaked and spat out a scarlet fireball while it was still over 100 meters away. When the fireball left its mouth, it wasn't even the size of a head, but when it reached 10 meters out, it suddenly expanded to a gigantic size and overtook the white wolf puppet in a storm of raging flames. Soon, the puppet released a muffled explosion from within the flames. The flames traveled incredibly quickly, and not even a single trace of the puppet remained behind. Han Li was shaken by the sight of this. The toad's demonic flames were at least an entire level beyond a cultivator's nascent flame. He grew doubtful about whether or not his celestial ice flames would be able to restrain it, but he wasn't too worried. After all, he still had two even more ferocious methods to slay the beast, the purple apex flames and the aureate sword formation. Not to mention that he would be able to slay the beast if he released all the core formation grade puppets he possessed, but in doing so, he would take a massive loss. The puppets would likely prove far more useful in other situations. At that moment, the flame toad croaked with satisfaction at having killed the enemy that intruded upon its lair. Then, in a blur of red mist, it turned around in a preparation to return. In that moment, the three cultivators glanced at each other with dismay. Han Li felt particularly anxious. Since the flame toad's core was a matter of life and death for Nangongwan, Han Li couldn't allow it to escape. A harsh expression on his face, his figure blurred and he shot towards it in a streak of azure light, his lone figure appearing at the edge of the spell formation. Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying were stunned when they saw this, but they soon realized what Han Li planned. Han Li's appearance had alarmed the flame toad just as he had intended. It quickly turned its head around and rigidly stared at the new enemy that had suddenly appeared close by. It remained motionless as it bewilderedly examined Han Li with one of its eyes. Han Li remained silent and simply raised the ball of flame in his hand while he slapped his storage pouch with his free hand. 6 balls of blue light dropped behind him, revealing themselves to be 10-meter-tall blue tortoise puppets. Under Han Li's mental command, the shells of the 6 huge tortoise puppets began to faintly glow with icy chi, quickly condensing foot-long icicles from their shells. Soon, their original meek appearance had turned extremely intimidating. The flame toad seemed to sense Han Li's hostility, and a cold glint appeared in its eyes. With a single breath, it released another ball of flame from its mouth. When Han Li saw the fireball expand and shoot towards him with overbearing force, he remained silent and promptly raised the hand holding the ice flames, intending on testing the might of the flame toad's demonic flames. Suddenly, an ember of blue ice drifted forward and met the oncoming giant ball of flame. At that point, the flame toad's fireball had already expanded to 20 meters in diameter, but the ember of the celestial ice flames was only several inches long. At a glance, they didn't appear comparable in the slightest, but upon contact, the flames and blue light ruptured in an astonishing display. A layer of dense blue ice covered the fireball, turning it into a ball of ice with a scarlet flame flickering at its center. Han Li was somewhat shaken by the sight of this. But when the ancient flame toad saw that its fireball was restrained, it was enraged and threw open its mouth, releasing hundreds upon hundreds of fist-sized fireballs in a furious barrage. Han Li pursed his lips and waved his hands. The 6 tortoise puppets lying behind him simultaneously shook their shells, launching the countless icicles that had condensed on their backs towards the barrage of fireballs. Explosions filled the air. Ruptured icicles turned into an icy mist, and fireballs imploded into large waves of flame, filling the air with roiling white chi. Han Li stared in front of him and narrowed his eyes. Soon it became clear that the fireballs were far stronger than the tortoise puppet's icicles. A moment later, the wave of fire began to overcome the icy mist. When Han Li saw this, he muttered to himself for a moment before suddenly retreating in a blur. The 6 huge tortoise puppets closely followed after him. At that moment, the wave of flames had completely overwhelmed the icy mist formed from the destroyed icicles and rushed forward without hesitation. But then, the 6 tortoise puppets shot out another barrage of icicles, blocking the wave of flames with a glacial mist. Han Li closely stared at the ancient flame toad that now appeared motionless and had its mouth closed. According to the information he had researched about Devil Fall Valley, the ancient flame toad should be able to recover its strength by drawing power from lava. In addition, with its immense skill in fire movement techniques, it's able to draw support from flames to travel over 3 kilometers in an instant. Since the interior of the mountain was submerged in a sea of lava, it would easily escape once it entered into the ground. However, Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying didn't seem to mind this. After all, they were here to acquire the treasure left behind by the deceased ancient cultivator. Even if they couldn't slay the beast, it was all the same if they could acquire the treasures from the cultivator remains. But this was not the case for Han Li, since he needed to acquire the demon beast's core for Nangong Wan. So long as the beast was lured into the spell formation and prevented from escaping, he would be able to wholeheartedly attack it. Making sure it couldn't escape was absolutely crucial. When the ancient flame toad saw that Han Li immediately retreated after fighting, it couldn't help but be puzzled. Since the beast wasn't very intelligent, it blurred forward without much thought and vigorously chased after Han Li. Han Li was overjoyed upon seeing this. After traveling a short distance, the flame toad became surrounded in a barrier of faint blue light. Several white lights flashed from the light barrier, releasing several ice dragons that coiled around the barrier, turning it icy and cold. The flame toad was alarmed and unconsciously came to a stop, as it wildly looked around it before releasing a menacing croak. At the same time, light shined from either side of the light barrier, and Marquis Nanlong and Lu Weiying simultaneously appeared. When the two saw that the flame toad was trapped by the spell formation, they began to unleash attacks without restraint. Marquis Nanlong tossed the jade ring from his hand, and Lu Weiying unleashed twin blue halberds that spiraled towards the flame toad. As expected, the spell formation's barrier didn't obstruct their treasures in the slightest, and their attacks penetrated the ice barrier to strike the flame toad within. The ice dragons surrounding the light barrier all flew up from it at once and attacked with brandished fangs. When Han Li saw this from a distance, he seized the opportunity to activate a formation flag in his hand, releasing a supplementary restriction in the formation to join together with his party's attacks. When the flame toad saw this, it knew that things were far from good. It released a world-shaking howl, and its body suddenly shrank before violently expanding, unleashing its life-saving ability. As soon as the beast howled, foot-long shields of scarlet light appeared all over the flame toad's body. Afterwards, they stuck to its body, creating 3 impenetrable barriers of fiery light. At that moment, the green jade ring, the ice dragons, and the blue twin halberds struck the fiery barrier simultaneously. Then a rumble shook the ice barrier, and various colored lights collided, releasing a blinding burst of light. But when the flame toad beast wildly roared again, a meter-wide beam of light suddenly shot out from its mouth, striking a side of the ice barrier. The barrier groaned as it withstood the attack, but after only a moment, a large hole was easily melted through it.